Chapter 2199. George's roar was an advertisement for the reopening of Mamie's. Customers arrived one after another and soon the restaurant was full again. Sigh, they're back after all. The breakfast shop owners in the southwest corner of Aden Square stood at the door and looked at the long line forming in front of Mamie's, feeling a little jealous. This is the return of the king. Even though it's been closed for a month, it's still your grandpa, one of the owners exclaimed. The owners were a little worried, but the loyal customers of Mamie's were all happy as if it was the new year. I was too careless. This group of youngsters doesn't know how to eat. It's the first day of business but they're all here earlier than me. Vivian's beautiful eyes widened as she looked at the long line in front of Mamie's. She was a little surprised. She was thinking of bringing breakfast back for her father. He had just returned from the front lines yesterday, and had to get up early this morning to busy himself with various matters. He would probably forget to eat breakfast again. But since she was already here, there was no reason to be afraid of waiting in line. The customers of Mamie's were very self-aware. They finished their meals comfortably, paid their bills and left quickly. They didn't drag their feet and make the customers behind them uncomfortable. As the new products, shaved noodles and soup dumplings were very popular today. And these two dishes lived up to expectations. They conquered the customers who ordered them with their delicious taste. Just the amazing skill of wrapping the soup into the thin skin of the dumplings was enough to convince the customers. As for the process of making knife-shaved noodles, it was more like watching a strange performance. A few children were so engrossed that they even forgot to eat. "Daddy, I want to learn this," a little girl who had just learned how to speak said as she pointed in the direction of the kitchen. "Daddy wants to learn too, but he doesn't agree to it," her father said helplessly. Meg saw many regulars. When he was free he would greet them. The one-armed knight sitting by the window and drinking soy milk with his head lowered attracted his attention. Conti was still silent. His empty right arm was a little dazzling, but the sapphire sword at his waist was still proud. Meg looked out and saw the black donkey eating the sprouts that had just sprouted. "Give it to the one-armed knight sitting by the window. Tell him it's a bonus from the investment." Meg handed a bamboo cage to Mia. "Okay." Mia walked over with the steamed buns. Conti was a little surprised at first, but after hearing Mia's explanation, a smile appeared on his face. He turned around and gestured in the direction of the kitchen. Meg replied with a smile. Speaking of which, Conti was one of the restaurant's earliest customers. Perhaps he no longer regarded slaying dragons as his goal, but he was still that proud knight. He didn't know how long he was going to stay in Chaos City this time. Perhaps he was going to leave on his new companion soon, and then come back here for a short rest. An interesting guest. A steamer of soup dumplings and a plate of Yangzhou fried rice to go. Vivian paid the bill and promised with a serious expression, "I'll carry them in my arms and bring them back to the city lord's mansion as soon as possible. I'll watch my father eat them with my own eyes and make sure that this basket of soup dumplings is eaten in the best condition." Mia looked at Vivian with a smile but still shook her head and said, "Soup dumplings are not on the list of takeaway items. Get another one." The thin skin of soup dumplings couldn't withstand the bumps. If they were accidentally broken on the road, the soup dumplings would lose their souls. Meg's rules were always strictly adhered to. He wouldn't make it easy for anyone. In order to let his customers eat the food in the best condition, he had strict requirements for takeout. "Then what about shaved noodles?" Vivian asked meekly. "Shaved noodles can't be eaten either." Mia shook her head. The best time to eat noodles was also very short. Once the broth cooled down, the noodles would clump together, and the texture would become sticky and terrible because it was soaked for too long. "All right. Seems like my father won't have the luck to eat it. I can only let him eat it himself next time." Vivian shrugged and didn't insist. She ordered a plate of lean pork and century egg porridge and a plate of Yangzhou fried rice instead. In the city lord's castle, the city lord's office, Michael had just finished reviewing a batch of documents. He had been at the front line of the ice field for the past few days, and a lot of work had piled up in the city lord's castle. Moreover, all the work that had been delayed because of the war after the peace treaty was signed had to be pushed forward, especially the cooperation plan with the goblins and dwarves. That was the focus of his work for the next period of time. Michael couldn't help but clench his fists as he excitedly said, "When the railway to the dwarf kingdom is opened, the three places will become even closer, and the commercial development will become more active. This is a grand occasion that hasn't been seen in 1,000 years. Gurgle, a loud sound pulled Michael's thoughts back. He frowned slightly. He had woken up early in the morning and hadn't had time to eat yet. Everyone was busy now, so it seemed like he could only eat at noon. "Father, are you not going to eat breakfast again?" The door of the study was pushed open, and Vivian walked in with her hands behind her back. "Why would I? I've already eaten breakfast," Michael said with a smile. He had to prevent his daughter from complaining to her mother. "Umph. In that case it seems like no one is eating the breakfast I brought. What a pity." Vivian took out the Yangzhou fried rice and lean pork and century egg porridge that she had brought with her and placed them on the table. She opened the lid and said leisurely. The aroma of the fried rice mixed with the smell of the century egg porridge went straight into Michael's nose. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Michael had wanted to save some face for himself and say that he wasn't hungry. He smiled awkwardly. It couldn't be helped. His stomach had its own ideas. "Hurry up and eat. Don't starve yourself. Otherwise I'm going to complain to Mother." Vivian pushed the 2 sets of breakfast directly in front of Michael with a smile, and took out the spoon considerately. "There's so much. Do you want to eat some together?" Michael looked at Vivian with warmth in his heart. His little sweetheart had grown up. She even knew how to dote on her father. "It's okay. I just had breakfast." Vivian shook her head and excitedly said, "Mr. Mac launched 2 new products today. The soup dumplings and knife-shaved noodles are both delicious. It's a pity that they can't be taken out. I wanted to bring them for you. Why don't we go and eat together tomorrow?" "Sure. I'll arrange the time tomorrow." Michael nodded and lowered his head to eat the porridge. His expression was a little strange when he remembered that this porridge was made by Alex himself. After all, he had slain the bone dragon at the front line of the ice field yesterday, and lured Cthulhu into the seal to end this dangerous war on the Norland continent. Then, he returned to Mamie's today and opened for business. He even launched 2 new products while he was at it. He let this old father feel the love from his daughter. Chapter 2200. Indeed, working hard to earn money is the most fulfilling life in this world. After the morning service ended, the restaurant returned to its peaceful state. Meg made a pot of braised food and sat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, basking in the warm sunlight. He nestled comfortably in the chair with Ugly Duckling, who had been abandoned at home, in his arms. Amy, who had a month's break, finally started school again, about a week earlier than the students of Chaos School, and was drawing in the study upstairs. The little one planned to refine Miss Black Cat again and personally hand it to Captain Vicky tomorrow to see if she could get her approval. Irina went to the textile factory as there were many things for her to handle for the night elves. Meg had not opened the restaurant for a long time, but the work of being the head chef did not tire him out. Instead, he felt even more motivated when he heard the praises of the customers. What other job in this world could earn him money and reputation at the same time? Such a job with both fame and fortune was not easy to find. After drinking a pot of tea alone, Meg wrapped Ugly Duckling in a red and blue coat and put it in the bicycle basket. He then took a picture book hand-drawn by and from the bookshelf and pushed the bicycle out. Meg rode the bicycle to the textile factory in the north of the city. The elf at the door was very polite to him, the nominal investor, and let him enter the factory without any trouble. Meg did not disturb Irina and went straight to the empty factory where the printing press from Ultraman's hometown was stored. The huge machine stood in the middle of the factory. The originally dusty surface had been scrubbed clean, and the unknown silver metal had a cold luster, exuding an amazing sense of technology. This thing was nuclear-powered, and it had attracted Shishi's attention the last time it was activated. However, Meg and Shishi were already familiar with each other. At least, they were familiar with each other. However, it should not be a problem to use this machine. For the ancients who could build advanced battleships, a nuclear-powered printing press was not something worth paying attention to. If they really asked, he would say that he dug it out from underground. Moreover, even if the ancients wanted to move it away for research, Meg would have no objections as long as he could get a printing press with the same function from them. After all, he had gotten this printing machine from Amy's system for free, so he didn't feel the pinch at all. Meg placed Anne's picture book in the scanning area. This was Anne's first complete work, The Story of the Little Mermaid. The machine is very advanced, but the operation is very stupid. Simple settings: scan the entire book, print the entire book, and then set the print quantity. Meg pondered for a moment. How about we just print 10,000 copies first? Most cartoonists would be embarrassed to call themselves a best-selling cartoonist if they didn't sell at least 10,000 copies, right? However, looking at the roaring machine and the neat stacks of picture books that were sent out from the conveyor belt, Meg felt that he was a little careless. He hadn't even found a sales channel for the picture book, and he had already printed 10,000 copies. At worst, I can just put it in front of the restaurant and sell it at 1,000 copper coins per book. That's a business worth 10 million. Meg stroked his chin as he pondered. He picked up a picture book that had been printed from the side. The printing quality was very high, and it looked as if it had been hand-drawn. There were no traces of printing, and the colors were vibrant, and the style was bright and lovely. It was an excellent color picture book. A picture book of this quality could be sold for at least 10,000 copper coins in Rodu. This was because before there was a breakthrough in printing technology, color picture books could only be hand-drawn by an artist. For an artist who could draw such an excellent picture book, it would take them a month or even longer to complete it. Even 10,000 copper coins would be considered a low price. Of course, Meg was using a printing machine, so he was cheating. However, 1,000 copper coins could be used as an enlightening reading material for rich people, as a bedtime reading material for young people, and as a good choice for straight men who couldn't get a gift. I heard from them that you're here? Irina pushed open the door and came in. She was a little surprised to see the picture books being sent out from the conveyor belt. This is the purpose of this machine? Yes, this is the printing machine. Meg handed the picture book in his hand to Irina with a smile. Irina flipped through the picture book in her hand, and the surprise on her face became even more pronounced. In the end, she put down the picture book and looked at the machine before her with starry eyes. This is a machine that can print money. Indeed, as a family, she also immediately discovered the value of this printing machine. Get a few people to pack it up in wooden boxes. 1,000 copies per box, and ship one box to Mamis every day. We'll start selling it today, Meg said with a smile. How much are you planning to sell it for per book? Irina asked. 1,000 copper coins per book. This is a long-term business, so we can't make it into a luxury item. And as a freak with her hands, Meg said with a smile. I have 10,000 copies here. Let's make 10 million to test the waters first. Irina nodded in agreement. After thinking for a while, she said, but the price of 1,000 copper coins will still be looked down upon by many children. Meg thought for a while and said, why don't we print another batch of black and white copies, and then sell them through the bookstore at the price of 1,000 copper coins? That's good. Irina's eyes lit up. There are still many night elves who are free now. I can transfer a batch of elves who are good at drawing and sculpting to complete the engraving and printing work. There's no need to trouble themselves with the engraving of the printing plates. This is a super printer, so they can just print the printing plates directly. They only need to complete the printing and binding work. Meg smiled and shook his head. He had already begun to consider the plan to build a simple black and white printer. With this super printer, he could complete the modeling and printing work directly on it. For many simple machines, he could even print all the parts. This was the power of technology. Meg originally had a 3D printer, but that thing had limited functions and could not be compared to this one. It was extremely difficult to play with. All right. Irina nodded. Although she did not really understand what Meg said, she somehow felt that he could be trusted. The printing of 10,000 copies of the picture books was completed very quickly. The elves custom-made wooden boxes, packed the picture books and prepared to send them to Amy's. Meg set up the printer, and directly 3D printed the printed plates of the picture books. The precision was extremely high and it could be used by brushing ink. Meg wrote a simple manual on how to use it. As for the specific work of choosing the paper and printing, he left it to Ashley to coordinate. The job of printing black and white picture books created at least 500 jobs for the night elves. Meg's initial request was to print 1,000 copies a day. After all, this was only black and white printing, so the price would not be too high. The profits could only be increased by the production. As for the market, Meg was not worried at all. The Norland continent would welcome a long 100 years of peace. Meg's goal was to sell Anne's picture books to the whole world. Just leave it here. You two young ladies, please wait for a while. At the entrance of Amy's, Meg stopped the two elves who came to deliver the books. Chapter 2201. Have you sold any books before? Meg asked the two elves with a smile. The two elves appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old. They had round and adorable faces and they shook their heads with flushed cheeks. That's right. From today onward, you'll be responsible for selling 1,000 books a day until all of them are sold out. I'll cover your 3 meals a day and you'll be paid 1,000 copper coins a day. What do you think? Meg offered with a smile. The taller elf's eyes lit up and she asked, do we eat at Mamie's? Of course we'll eat together. Meg nodded with a smile. The two elves looked at each other before replying in unison, then we'd like to. They had often heard from Big Sister Phyllis that Mamie's was the best restaurant in the world, and that the owner could cook delicious food. However, due to the exorbitant prices, they had never tasted any of the food before. Big Sister Phyllis's cooking was also very delicious, but she said that her cooking skills were not even 1/10,000th of the owner of Mamie's. If they could eat at Mamie's for free, that would be fantastic. I'm Meg, the owner and head chef of Mamie's. Meg introduced himself with a smile. We recognize you, Mr. Meg. The taller elf smiled and said, I'm Molly and this is my sister Eve. Molly Eve, nice to meet you. Meg nodded as he pulled out a human-sized billboard that he had just printed at the textile factory. He then moved a table over and pulled out a few dozen books from a wooden box before laying them out on the table. There are 1,000 books here, and the prices are already indicated on the billboard. Your job is to deliver the books to the customers for 1,000 copper coins, and each customer is limited to 2 books, Meg explained to the 2 elves. Mr. Meg, we have 10,000 books, why is there a limit? Wouldn't it be better if more people were willing to buy them? Eve asked with a perplexed expression. Molly was also perplexed. That's because once this book is sold, its market price will be well over 1,000 copper coins. If I take this album to Rodu, I can sell it for 10,000 copper coins or even higher before the news of it being sold in bulk spreads. Meg explained with a smile, I want more people to be able to appreciate this album, and not let it be hoarded by a small number of people for profit. 10,000 copper coins? Lee's and Eve's jaws dropped in shock. They could not imagine that the price of the sketchbook would increase by tenfold if they were to go to another location. This box will be used to store money. Don't worry, Mamie's customers are all very well-mannered, they will definitely be able to handle it. Meg moved a large box and placed it at their feet, then arranged 2 high stools for them. Thank you, boss, the 2 girls said with a smile. Get used to the working environment first. I'll call you to eat later, Meg said to them and turned to enter the restaurant. He went upstairs to change into his chef's uniform and began to prepare for the lunch service. Boss, are Molly and Eve here to help sell the sketchbook? Phyllis asked as she entered and looked at Meg, who was putting on an apron. Yeah, we're short on staff, so they're here to deliver the sketchbook. I saw that they were quite smart, so I asked them to come and help me. Meg nodded. Ho ho, the advertisement sign at the door, Anne's drawing is so beautiful. Yabamiya followed him into the restaurant with a smile, and said, I'm going to go upstairs and ask our famous artist to come down and take a look at her portrait. Signing is a good idea. Meg nodded. This was a necessary step for a best-selling comic artist. Painting was a lonely thing. Being able to receive positive feedback from the readers would give him a great sense of accomplishment. Then I'll go now. Yabamiya ran upstairs and soon came down holding Anne's hand. She led the confused Anne to the door. Annie stood at the entrance of the restaurant and looked at the tall signboard. She was wearing a long dress and holding a paintbrush. She was painting seriously. She could not help but widen her eyes and stand there with her mouth slightly agape. She was stunned. Next to her portrait, there were 2 lines of words, Genius Comic Artist Anne's first color work, The Story of the Little Mermaid, is limited edition. 1,000 copper coins per volume. You're the genius comic artist, Anne, right? Your drawings are so beautiful. Eve looked at Anne and praised sincerely. Anne's Adam's apple bobbed and she recovered from her shock. Then a sense of shame welled up in her, but she still thanked Eve politely with sign language. Anne has a small problem with her throat, so she's using sign language for the time being, Mia explained with a smile. Molly and Eve nodded in understanding. Anne nodded to the 2 of them and turned to enter the restaurant, her face flushed red. Do you like it? It's your first color work for sale. Meg looked at the blushing Anne. Anne looked at Meg and felt a little shy, but also a little touched, but she still nodded to show that she liked it. Hearing other people's praise and seeing her drawings placed on the table and about to be sold to others. It was a wonderful feeling. It was as if she had suddenly found the reason why she wanted to do this. Sharing beautiful things with more people, wasn't this her original intention when she picked up the brush? More people could hear the stories told by her father, and more people could feel the warmth and love. What an interesting thing. I like it a lot. And reiterated. That's good. Once these 10,000 volumes are sold, we'll be best-selling comic artists. Meg smiled and he was also proud of her. As for the signing, Anne rejected it. The little girl was still a little shy. However, Meg thought about it from another perspective. Anne was still a greenhorn and she might not be willing to sign her drawings, so he gave up. It was close to noon and customers started to line up outside the restaurant. The news of Mamie's reopening had already spread. Those foodies who didn't make it for breakfast in the morning rushed over early, afraid that they would miss lunch. Milo and Garland were among them. The 2 of them looked a lot more haggard after being trapped in Chaos City for so many days because of the sudden war. Garland had a small stubble on his face, which he shaved casually at the inn. When they heard the news of victory, the two of them cried tears of joy at the inn, and even prepared to set off for home overnight. However, they really didn't want to make this trip for nothing. After all, the new peace treaty had been signed, and the Norland continent was about to welcome a long period of peace. Their magazine's next goal was to sell the Norland continent. Hence, the two of them decided to make another trip to Mamie's to see if Mr. Mac was there. The advertisement board at the entrance attracted their attention. They thought it was Mr. Mac's new dish, but when they took a closer look, it was actually promoting a comic. Genius comic artist Anne? I don't think I've heard of her. Milo scratched his head. Yeah, a newbie? Garland shook his head too. You don't know, but Miss Anne is Mr. Mac's daughter. A regular at the restaurant laughed. Chapter 2202. Milo and Garland were both stunned when they heard that. They looked at the girl on the billboard who looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. They didn't expect Mr. Mac to have such a daughter other than Little Boss. Not only Garland and Milo, but the customers lining up at the door were also surprised when they saw the two elven girls standing behind the desk piled with comic books. Mr. Mac had disappeared for a month, and Mamie started selling comic books as a part-time job after he came back. Moreover, the price of a comic book was as high as 1,000 copper coins. Although Mamie's dishes were never cheap, the quality was very high, and they were recognized by the customers. However, the market price of a comic book was usually dozens of copper coins. Just because it was drawn by Mr. Mac's daughter, it was sold at the door of Mamie's for thousands of copper coins. It was a little too much to take the customers for fools. Milo stroked his chin as he said, "If it's 1,000 copper coins, then apart from some limited edition pornographic brochures in Rodu, it's very difficult to fetch such a high price. The only exception is if it's a copy of the original." "Why do you know so much about the market?" Garland sized him up. "I've only heard about it. I don't know much about it," Milo said seriously, trying to hide the fact that he had collected countless comic books. The market in Chaos City is about the same. The comic book market is mostly focused on the younger age, so the price is relatively low. Harrison, who was standing behind them, interrupted. "The comic books that occasionally come from Rodu are indeed of very high quality. It's an enviable resource. Great minds think alike." Milo looked back at him with an appreciative smile. "Miss, is this comic book really 1,000 copper coins per comic book?" Garland asked. The purpose of their visit today was to meet Meg, conduct a new round of interviews, and get his next column draft. Whole Foods and Delicacies sold a record 1 million copies in such a turbulent environment with Meg's draft, and became the magazine's best-selling issue since its inception. And Whole Foods and Delicacies also successfully secured the top position in the magazine industry with the sales of this issue. They stayed in Chaos City for an entire month, but the messenger pigeons flying to them from Rodu almost never stopped. The boss had given a death order. No matter what conditions Mr. Meg put forward, they had to satisfy him. They had to make him sign an exclusive agreement with Whole Foods American magazine. This was a man who could single-handedly change the structure of a gourmet magazine. His powerful influence was showing. It was hard to imagine that a chef from Chaos City would one day be able to influence the audiences of magazines from all over the Norland continent. Therefore, Garland decided to get to know Mr. Meg's talented daughter first. He had seen how much Meg doted on the little boss and knew that he was a true slave to his daughter. For such a person, the easiest way to cater to his interests was to start with his daughter. Although the price of 1,000 copper coins was a little expensive, it was worth it as long as it could increase Mr. Meg's impression of him. Perhaps only one copy of these comics could be sold today, and if he bought the only copy, then it would be a little different. "Yes, sir. The price of the comic is 1,000 copper coins per copy, and each person is limited to 2 copies, Molly said with a calm and generous smile. Mr. Mag had told her that if this album were to be sold in Rodu, it would fetch tens of thousands of copper coins per copy. Now that he was selling it for 1,000 copper coins per copy, it was a massive discount. "It's limited to 1 copy?" Garland was slightly taken aback. The customers in the line behind him were also surprised. Amy's had a tradition of limiting the number of delicacies that they could buy in order to allow more customers to taste the delicacies, and to prevent people from buying in large quantities and reselling them. Who would have thought that not only would this comic cost 1,000 copper coins, but it would also be limited to 1 copy? Garland thought for a moment before calming down. He then asked in a benevolent manner, "Can you give it a try?" Mr. Meg was a wise man. Garland could tell that from their brief interaction. A man like him wouldn't be so short-sighted as to take advantage of his customers' trust in him. The only reason why he dared to set a price of 1,000 copper coins and set a limit to one copy was that this comic was worth it. All of the customers also turned to look at the two elven girls upon hearing this. It would be obvious whether this comic was worth 1,000 copper coins or not. Eve picked up a thin comic and handed it to Garland. This is a trial version. Please don't spoil it after you read it. Garland accepted the thin comic. On the cover was a beautiful little mermaid. It's colorful? Garland's eyes lit up with astonishment. This little mermaid was extremely lifelike, and the style was very mature. It didn't look like the work of a novice at all. In fact, it had already surpassed the vast majority of artists in the market. More importantly, these bright colors were painted on by one stroke, right? Garland eagerly flipped open the comic. The content inside was also colorful. Could it be a full-color comic? Garland's heart skipped a beat. This was an extremely valuable comic in the market. As the editor-in-chief of a gourmet magazine, he had daily contact with some of his fellow editors who made comic books, so he knew the market. A comic of this quality would cost at least 30,000 copper coins. Because such a comic would take an excellent artist several months to complete, the price was naturally not cheap. Garland simply flipped through the trial version, which was only about 10 pages long. Whether it was the style, storyboard, or story, they were all top-notch. From these, one could see the artist's level. If this was really the work of Mr. Meg's 14-year-old daughter, then she was indeed worthy of the title of a genius cartoonist. Is the content and quality of this comic the same as the trial version? Garland looked at Eve and asked. Yes. Eve nodded with certainty. Then I'll take 2 copies. Garland said without hesitation. What's going on? Milo was shocked. A good comic? You want to buy 2 copies directly after reading the trial version? This can't be a scammer, right? The customers also looked at Garland in surprise. 1,000 copper coins for a comic was not cheap. See for yourself. Garland directly handed the trial version of the comic to Milo. So cute. Milo looked at the little mermaid on the cover and his eyes lit up. As a senior otaku, he had read countless comic books and could see the artist's level at a glance. The level was already above 99% of the artists, and the control of the character's expressions was at the top of the pyramid. This was a talent that couldn't be learned. This kind of person was generally called a drawing monster. There was still room for improvement, but this level of painting was enough to make a living. Why is it colorful? Milo quickly asked the same question as Garland. Chapter 2203. He was used to finding the soul between black and white and rough lines. He also often sighed at the artist's exquisite work and the helplessness of being dragged down by the rough printing. At first glance, seeing this exquisite painting full of details and bright colors, Milo was still a little dazed. He flipped open the cover and quickly flipped through a few pages of the comic. Like Garland, he quickly discovered the value of this picture album. A full-color picture book with a very high degree of completion, great style, and novel story was worth far more than 1,000 copper coins. He had a few picture albums drawn by artists in his collection, and the price ranged from 10,000 to 50,000 copper coins. If this picture album appeared in Rodu, it wouldn't be surprising if it was sold for 50,000 copper coins by a rich young lady she liked. I want two too, Milo said without hesitation. It was a profit if he could buy it. When he returned to Rodu, he could collect one and sell the other. He could still make a small profit. How delightful. After the two of them saw the trial version, they both decided to buy 2 copies. This piqued the curiosity of the customers in the queue. Seeing the two of them fork out money to buy the 2 picture albums, the crowd wanted to know what the picture album was even more. Let me see it too. Harrison was also a picture book enthusiast. He was the player with the most books in the circle of Chaos City. He took the trial version from Milo, and was also shocked by the painting on the cover. There were almost no decent painters in Chaos City, so it was extremely difficult to find a painting book from Rodu. The few paintings he had were of mediocre quality, but they were enough for him to show off in his small circle. And now, the quality of this picture book had far surpassed all the picture books he had. The exquisite pictures and the cute little mermaid were all very lovable. Georgina's birthday was coming soon. Harrison had been thinking about what to give her as a present these days. Now that he saw this picture book, he finally found his target. I want 2 too. Harrison said without hesitation and began to fork out money. Harrison was a regular at Mamie's. Many people recognized him. What is this picture album? All of them are just buying without saying anything after reading it. Could it really be a treasure? I like picture books. Let me see it too. The customers discussed, and the trial version of the picture book began to spread among the crowd. Wow, it's actually a full color. I didn't expect it to be so strong. Mama. The Little Mermaid was so beautiful. I want it. Daddy, I want a Little Mermaid too. If you don't buy one for me, I'll cry. You're already 32 years old, can't you speak more maturely? A man is a youth until he dies. I want one. I want one too. The customers who saw the trial version were completely convinced by the quality of the drawing. Discerning people had already seen the value of this picture album. Parents were also willing to buy an excellent children's book for their children. After all, the story was interesting and childlike. Of course, the main reason was that most of Amy's regulars did not lack money. 1,000 copper coins might seem expensive, but it was far less than the cost of a meal at Mamie's. Emily and Eve frantically counted the money before handing the sketchbook to the enthusiastic customer. After all, this was the first time they had come out to sell. They had no experience and had never seen so much money before. The two of them were a little dizzy from all the work. Don't be in such a hurry. Everyone line up and come one at a time. Yabamiya's voice sounded as she took the money handed to her by a customer. After glancing at it, she tossed it into the cash box and picked up a sketchbook, placing it in the customer's hand. Yabamiya's appearance quickly restored order and the customers lined up to buy the sketchbooks one by one. This sister is so impressive. Emily and Eve wiped the sweat off their forehead and watched as Yabamiya smiled and chatted with the customers. Their eyes were filled with admiration as they watched her complete the transaction. Before the restaurant opened for business, 1/3 of the sketchbooks had already been sold. Many of the customers in the line were holding the sketchbooks in their hands. Many of them could not help but start flipping through the pages and gasp in amazement. All right, let's stop for a while. It's time for us to go and eat. Yabamiya handed the sketchbook to the last customer who came forward. She smiled as she took out the signboard from under the table and placed it on the table. She then locked the cash box and turned around to enter the restaurant with the two young ladies. Don't we need someone to keep watch? Eve asked softly. Boss said that eating is the most important thing when it's time for a meal. Mia smiled and said, otherwise not only will you go hungry, everyone who's waiting to eat with you will also suffer. Emily and Eve nodded thoughtfully. They then entered the restaurant and were greeted by the sight of Irina sitting at the dining table. Your Highness. The two of them were startled and hurriedly bowed respectfully. Irina nodded slightly and said, go wash your hands and get ready for dinner. The two of them were initially a little nervous, but they were flattered to hear this. Were they going to eat with the princess? Let's go, I'll take you to wash your hands. Yabamiya smiled as she pulled the two of them toward the kitchen. The picture books are selling well. They're very well made. More. You still have work to do later, Mag praised with a smile as he looked at the two sisters who were sitting awkwardly. He had seen the frenzied rush to buy the sketchbooks, and it was within his expectations. However, he was still a little proud. Emily and Eve snuck a glance at Irina, but still didn't dare to eat first. Let's eat. Irina looked at the two of them and nodded. Only then did the two of them pick up their chopsticks and focus on the sumptuous lunch in front of them. This lunch was simply too sumptuous. There were all kinds of delicacies that they had never seen before, and the taste was beyond their imaginations. There was tofu pudding that melted in their mouths, spicy steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers, crispy and delicious beggar's chicken, soft and sweet braised pork. Emily and Eve felt as if they were in a dream. They couldn't believe that such delicious food existed in this world. If possible, they were willing to work for Mamie's as long as they could eat. As for their salary, it didn't matter at all. Could money buy such delicious food? It could, but 1,000 copper coins definitely wasn't enough. After lunch, everyone took a short break and Meg opened the restaurant for business. Mr. Meg, you have two outstanding daughters? Garland was the first to enter the restaurant, and he looked at Mag with a sincere expression. He then made his way over to Mag and lowered his voice as he said, I have something very important to discuss with you after the lunch service. Sure. Meg nodded with a smile. After the tireless efforts of Whole Foods and Delicious Food, Meg's fans had successfully exceeded 300,000. It was quite a successful collaboration. MX. Chapter 2204. On the first day of Mamie's reopening, Meg announced that rum would be on sale again at 1,000 copper coins a bottle. However, to prevent customers from misunderstanding, Meg still reiterated that this batch of rum was not brewed by Old Sim himself. It came from Old Sim's granddaughter, Hannah, and was brewed in a brand new distillery in Chaos City using the rum that Old Sim had stored for decades as the base. It was also because of this that the price of this batch of rum became much more affordable. As Old Sim's only successor, Hannah had already made a name for herself in the rum brewing industry. However, no one expected her to come to Chaos City and build a new distillery in Chaos City. Seems like we came at the right time today. We can drink high-quality rum again, the storyteller Old Carl said with a chuckle. Previously he had asked Meg many times about when rum would be on sale again. He didn't expect rum to be back after Mamie's closed for a month. Although it wasn't brewed by Old Sim himself, Master Hannah's brewing skills were still trustworthy. In this world, Hannah was the only master of rum brewing after Master Old Sim passed away. Although she was still young, it was said that the Fok tribe's high-quality rum all these years was brewed by Hannah. There was no doubt about her ability. She used Old Sim's original rum as the base to brew a new batch of rum, so it was naturally something to look forward to. Furthermore, the price of 1,000 copper coins a bottle was much cheaper than the previous price of 1,000 copper coins a cup. Even if they couldn't finish it, they could still bring it back to drink slowly. It was more affordable. Many rum lovers ordered a bottle as soon as they sat down. A rum that could be released at Mamie's would definitely be more than just stepping on a landmine. Meg glanced at the rum on the wine cabinet with a smile. He had tried this rum during the gathering last night. The quality was excellent. Although it was slightly inferior to the aged rum that had been stored for many years, it didn't affect its excellence at all. More importantly, Hannah's distillery could already produce rum in batches with stable quality now. The daily output could reach 1,000 bottles, and the production was still increasing. This was bottled rum, and it was 500 milliliters for a bottle. It wasn't just sold in the restaurant. With its quality that was better than 99% of the rum in the market, there was still room for price increase at 1,000 copper coins. In Feng Yu's previous life, the market leader was Maotai, with a market value of trillions. Let's not bite off more than we can chew. Let's set a small target and earn 100 million first. In this world where no distillery had a reputation beyond the local area, Meg intended to make rum into an excellent brand. Selling alcohol was a good business with little capital and huge profits. This market would start from Mamie's. Then they would set up rum franchises. After the production had increased, they would begin to expand their distribution channels and gradually sell to the whole world. Old Carl quickly got the rum he ordered. It was a black clay bottle with a wooden stopper. Pulling out the cork, the rich aroma of rum wafted out. It was the unique aroma of rum that was hard to resist. He took the wine glass and poured it carefully. The amber-colored wine gently swayed in the cup. It was clear and translucent, and it was suffused with light. There wasn't the slightest bit of impurities, and it sparkled like starlight. Old Carl raised the wine glass to his mouth and took a sip. The delicate and sweet taste was almost no different from the rum he drank previously. The rich aroma lingered in his mouth and rose. The light feeling made him raise his eyebrows slightly, and the wisps of wood fragrance made him feel even more emotional. If there was a difference, it would probably be in the aftertaste. The rum that Old Sim had stored for more than 10 years had a long aftertaste, making one intoxicated and unable to extricate themselves. This rum had a slightly sweet aftertaste and also had a unique flavor. However, it had not been stored for a long time, so it was still lacking in flavor. Of course, this was because Old Carl had once tasted Old Sim's aged rum before and made this evaluation. However, even with such a gem in front of him, the quality of this bottle of rum still far exceeded his expectations. That little difference was completely negligible. To be able to drink such high-quality rum for 1,000 copper coins, and such a big bottle at that, it was simply too kind. Old Carl could drink such a bottle of rum for at least 3 days. Even if he invited 2 or 3 drinking buddies, it would be enough to drink. Mr. Mac is really a kind boss. Old Carl could not help but sigh. These noodles are too delicious. Milo held the bowl and drank all the noodle soup in it. He licked the corner of his mouth in satisfaction. He was trying out Mr. Mac's new product with the mentality of tasting it. A new product that had just been released today would definitely not have been written about yet. As an excellent food critic, he had a keen sense of awareness. When Mr. Mac's Gourmet magazine was popular, it was not shameful to take advantage of his popularity. It was also a wise choice. Wouldn't it be better to get more royalties? The boss had already said that as long as his article this month was related to Mamie's, his royalties would be tripled. Yes, it was just that overbearing. Milo only wanted to say to this kind of boss who restricted the freedom of the author's creation, "Please, the more the better." Compared to the minced meat in the noodles of other shops, the braised beef noodles and the knife-shaved noodles almost filled the entire bowl. The small cubes of braised beef noodles were plump and lean with some tendons. They were soft and delicious, giving the customers a more wonderful chewing experience. The noodles were even more special. The noodles were like willow leaves, slightly thicker in the middle and thinner on both sides. They were soft and smooth without losing their chewiness. They were soaked in the bone broth, and every bite was full of wheat fragrance, making people unable to stop eating. The broth was bone broth. Without a long time of simmering, it was impossible to simmer this snow-white, milky bone broth. When the mouth was full of meat fragrance after eating the noodles, you could not bear to leave any soup behind. After eating this bowl of noodles, Milo could only think of one word: how fragrant. Of course, in Milo's heart, he had already written a 5,000-word draft to give a professional review of all aspects of this knife-shaved noodles. Milo felt that he could write about the process of cutting the dough into dough leaves. It was a pity that he could not see such an exciting scene with his own eyes. Garland, who was sitting opposite him, skillfully picked up a piece of dough, picked up a piece of roast duck with skin and meat, and walked it in the sweet sauce. Then he added scallions and cucumbers and casually wrapped it up before stuffing it into his mouth. The duck meat that had just been sliced was still piping hot. The skin was crispy, and the lean duck meat with a hint of fat was exceptionally plump and mellow. Wrapped in the lotus leaf cake, the crispy duck skin and tender duck meat melted in the mouth at the same time. A rich fragrance instantly spread in the mouth. The more he chewed, the more obvious the fragrance became. The taste buds on the tip of his tongue were completely activated, and he sucked in that wonderful taste greedily. The haze that had accumulated in Chaos City for the past month seemed to have completely dispersed at this moment. All that was left was a delicacy that made him want to cry. Garland swallowed the roast duck in his mouth. As he wrapped a piece of duck meat, he asked, "Are you feeling it? I need to add some more inspiration." Milo picked up a piece of dough, and his chopsticks were already reaching for the roast duck. Chapter 2205. The lunch service ended and the satisfied customers left. Many of them were in a good mood and brought a picture book with them. The relaunched rum sold more than 200 bottles in one afternoon, and Anne's picture book sold 600 copies. Molly and Eve looked at the gold and silver coins in the cash box that was almost overflowing, and they were shocked. They never thought that the box of picture books they sent would turn into a big box of money. "Molly, Eve, it's been hard on you. Go back and rest for a while. Come back at 4 in the afternoon and sell the remaining 400 copies. You're done for the day." Meg let the two of them off with a smile. 600,000 in the bank. This business was very good. Meg planned to give 50% of the money he earned from selling the picture books to Anne, and let her use it herself. Meg planned to use the remaining 50% to invest in the whole comic industry. Since a gourmet magazine could sell millions of copper coins, this meant that the reading market was actually very big. The integration of the Norland continent was a trend, and it was also something that Meg would work hard to promote. In the future, there would definitely be works that would sell well all over the Norland continent. Could be a certain book or a certain comic. Of course, for comics to be popular, the printing problem had to be solved. With the super printing press, it wouldn't be difficult to get a simple printing press. Meg already had some ideas in his mind. "Mr. Meg." Garland and Milo, who were waiting outside, came up with a smile. "Come in and have a seat." Meg smiled as he led the two into the restaurant. After making a pot of tea, Meg sat opposite the two and leaned back comfortably in the chair. "Mr. Mack, you didn't open the door for a month. You made us wait for so long," Garland said with a hint of bitterness. They had been waiting for Amy's for a month, but didn't see Meg open the door. They didn't even put in so much effort to chase girls. "I had to go out to get materials. I had no choice," Meg said with a smile without a hint of guilt. After all, he had gone to do business. Now that they could sit here leisurely and have afternoon tea, they had to thank the soldiers who had sacrificed themselves on the front line. "I didn't get to eat the soup dumplings in the morning, but this knife-shaved noodles is really delicious, and the process of making it is quite magical. You really created a perfect pastry with the ingredients you used this time." Milo praised, and his words and expression did not hide his admiration for Meg. "It's 2, Meg corrected. Milo was taken aback for a moment before he smiled and said, "It seems that I have to get up early tomorrow." Actually, Meg still had some red oil wontons and hot dry noodles that he hadn't released yet. However, he couldn't spoil them and had to wait for another 2 days before releasing them. After all, he was preparing to rest the next day. In order to prevent being beaten up, it would be perfect if he released 2 new products after reopening the day after tomorrow. "Mr. Meg, you may not know this, but the last issue of Whole Foods sold over 1 million copies. It was the issue that you published your column in." Garland looked at Meg and said excitedly. As an old comrade in the editorial office, he knew what kind of achievement such a sales volume was. So you want to give me more money for that article? Meg smiled. Garland choked. The reason why this issue of Whole Foods magazine was so popular was because of Meg's exclusive interview and the eggplant with garlic sauce tutorial written by Meg himself. It could be said that Meg had made Whole Foods and delicacies popular in this episode. There was a rule in the magazine world. No matter how popular your article was, the royalties were set in advance and would not change. However, as long as your article was popular, it meant that your next article would get a higher price. I need to discuss this with the boss. He hasn't had time to discuss this with me, Garland said cautiously. Although there were rules, Meg was now the most popular fried chicken in the gourmet world. The rules could be changed completely. It's okay. I'm just kidding. Meg smiled. With 1 million copies of the magazine, the profit that their editorial office could make was estimated to be a few million. Even if he was given more money, a few 100,000 was not as good as the 2 girls selling albums for a whole afternoon. However, the hundreds of thousands of fans that Whole Foods brought to him was the biggest gain. Garland smiled, but he did not take Meg's words as a joke. He was going to go back and discuss the issue of royalties with the boss. Garland looked at Meg with a sincere expression and said, "We're here to discuss with Mr. Mag about continuing our collaboration. We'd like to sign an exclusive column with you. If you publish an exclusive column with Whole Foods, we'll pay you handsomely." Meg's sales volume. This had become a big consensus in the gourmet magazine world. In just a month, almost all the mainstream magazines published gourmet reviews about Mamie's, most of which were gourmet reviews. This shameless behavior made the magazines usher in the peak of magazine sales. However, compared with the millions of sales volume of Meg's eggplant with garlic exclusive tutorial, it was still a level lower. Because of this, Whole Foods clearly realized the importance of signing Meg's exclusive column. As long as they can sign Meg's exclusive column, Whole Foods will be invincible in the gourmet magazine world and open the God mode. Whole Foods has prepared enough chips for this, and with the previous cooperation as a foundation, Garland is still confident about this trip. "Sorry, I won't sign an exclusive agreement with any gourmet magazine." Meg shook his head and refused. Both Garland and Milo were stunned, and there was a bit of anxiety on their faces. "Mr. Meg, your talent is amazing. We, Whole Foods, cherish the opportunity to cooperate with you very much. We look forward to working together in the future to create more brilliant achievements. We will create a series of magazines around you so that more people can see the story behind gourmet food." Garland looked at Meg and said sincerely, "If you are considering the problem of remuneration, I can guarantee you on behalf of Whole Foods and Meg that our offer will be the highest and most conscientious in the industry." "You misunderstood. I'm not interested in money." He took a sip of tea and said calmly, "I just want more people to be able to appreciate different gourmet food." "Then what kind of cooperation are you looking forward to?" Garland's eyelids twitched a few times and this sounded outrageous. "I have received a lot of invitations recently and the prices are good, but I will not choose any magazine to sign an exclusive contract, but I intend to choose 10 magazines as partners to publish a gourmet column at the same time." Meg continued, "Whole Foods and Meg will be among these 10. This?" Garland's expression was a little complicated, and he didn't know whether to be happy or sad. He came with a task this time. If he couldn't sign an exclusive contract, he would be torn apart by the boss when he went back. But Mr. Meg is obviously not an existence that can be shaken with a little money. Whether he is interested in money or not, it is a fact that he is rich. Chapter 2206. Meg had a good impression of Whole Food Mart. After all, it was a situation where they helped each other. At least they were capable and not lousy teammates. But as he said, what he needed was to face a wider range of food lovers to increase his popularity. 1 million sales was the record for Whole Food Mart. But this was far from meeting Meg's needs. Even if it sold 1 million copies every issue, there would be many repeat readers. What he needed was more new fans to increase his faith and continue on the path of becoming a god through faith. Everyone said that he couldn't become a god on the Norland continent, but he wanted to try. Therefore, he needed more media to spread his name so that more people could follow his cooking through different channels. Meg's attitude was honest and firm, and Garland wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for him. He could only finalize part of the cooperation agreement first to at least ensure that Whole Food Mart could have a place in this banquet. He needed to report the rest to his boss and wait for the next instructions. This was already beyond his authority. "Mr. Mack, your spirit is admirable, Milo said sincerely to Meg as he stood up and looked at him with admiration. He was really impressed by this young chef who was full of creativity. While other chefs were still guarding against each other and building high walls for the so-called inheritance, Meg was thinking about how to let more ordinary people make delicious food at home. That kind of selfless dedication and love for delicious food were all very moving. It was conceivable that Meg would definitely have a deep impact on the Norland continent's food structure. It could even be said that he would directly raise the level of Norland continent's food. He was a godlike existence in the world of food. Although Milo contributed to Whole Food Mart, he was first and foremost a gourmet. He deeply admired Meg's decision. This was a man who was destined to change the world, not just be a chef in a restaurant. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. After sending the two of them off, Meg went on to meet the people in charge of a few magazines. These were the few powerful gourmet magazines that he had chosen with a wide range of coverage. Everyone was surprised when they heard Meg's proposal, but they quickly rejoiced that they at least had a chance to work together. One had to know that Whole Foods and Delicacies had the upper hand. With millions of sales, they would definitely have offered several generous conditions. Unexpectedly, they did not manage to get the exclusive rights in the end. Not being able to get an exclusive meant that it would be difficult to create a miracle like Whole Foods and Whole Foods that sold millions of copies. However, with Meg's personal gourmet teaching, they would definitely be able to get a share of this feast. The increase in sales was worth looking forward to. The signing went very smoothly. In one afternoon, Meg confirmed 10 gourmet magazines and agreed that the next submission time would be 3 days later. Mama, this picture album is so beautiful, but I'm so hungry after reading it. I also want to eat the braised pork made by the Little Prince. A little girl of 5 or 6 years old was holding a picture album of the Little Mermaid and looking at the woman who was arranging flowers. If you want to eat red braised pork, you have to find Mr. Mac. Catsilon put down the scissors in her hand and said with a smile. Then is Mr. Mac the Little Prince? Alice's starry eyes lit up. Catsilon was slightly taken aback. She thought that Mr. Mac must have been more handsome than the Little Prince when he was young, and could cook well too. He looked just as charming now. She nodded with a smile. If Chaos City has a prince, then Mr. Mac should be the gourmet prince. Gourmet prince. Then can I marry him? I also want to eat red braised pork every day. I like meat, Alice asked expectantly. That will have to wait until our Alice grows up. After all, many women want to marry Mr. Mac, Catsilon said with a smile. This little fellow was really not careless at all. She had chosen many women's dream lovers in one go. Alice tapped her little finger and said worriedly, Then when I grow up, will Mr. Mac be snatched away by other bad women? If that's the case, there will definitely be a prince more suitable for Alice. He will bring more delicious meat to take you. Catsilon smiled gently. Really? Alice swallowed her saliva as though she had already thought of delicious food. Alice's father brought back a talking bird. Come out and see. A little boy's voice came from outside. Brother, I'm coming. Alice answered and ran out with her short legs. Catsilon watched Alice's back figure disappear at the door lovingly. Then, she sat down at the table and casually took the picture book that Alice was looking at earlier. This picture book was brought back by her man in the afternoon. He said that he bought it at Amy's. It was drawn by Mr. Mac's daughter. Alice loved it so much that she couldn't put it down. This was the first time she had seen it. The drawing is so exquisite. Catsilon's eyes lit up as she looked at the cover of the picture book. The little mermaid sitting on the reef was obedient and cute. The moonlight shone on the surface of the sea and the stars in the sky. It was exquisite and beautiful. She had bought many picture books for her 2 children over the years, and her husband would occasionally bring some back from his trips to Rodu. Some of those books were quite expensive, but none of them could compare to this one in terms of quality. Catsilon was attracted by the cover and flipped open the picture book. Soon she was attracted by the beautiful pictures and the fascinating story. After a long time, Catsilon slowly closed the picture book. Her eyes were wet. After a long time, she recovered from her sadness. So touching, this is really a good story. Catsilon sniffed and sighed softly. She didn't expect a picture book drawn by a child to be such a touching love story. She couldn't get the love and even ended up in bubbles. The story of the Little Mermaid moved her. But why don't we go to Amy's for dinner tonight? I suddenly feel like eating red braised pork. Catsilon's throat moved. She opened the picture book again and looked at the scene of the little prince making red braised pork for the Little Mermaid. Looking at the scene of the soft and delicious red braised pork being bitten open by the Little Mermaid, her stomach couldn't help but growl. but the preparation process is so detailed. Even the amount of ingredients is written clearly. It should be Mr. Mac's personal guidance, right? Or is The Little Prince based on Mr. Mac? I just don't know if the chef at home can make it. Katsilan pondered, picked up the picture book and walked to the kitchen. Madam, this dish looks a little complicated. We need some time to study and experiment. We should be able to make it. The head chef looked a little excited after reading the recipe of the red braised pork in the picture book. However, he didn't dare to say too much. But he was sure that this would be a very delicious dish. Because it came from from the chef who was gradually becoming a god, Meg. He didn't expect him to put the recipe of the red braised pork in this picture book without hiding anything. Chapter 2207. What's the matter? What are you going to eat today? Georgina asked with a smile as she held Harrison's arm and bit into a candied hawthorn. 2 cute dimples appeared on her chubby cheeks. Harrison stared at her in a daze. Georgina blushed under his stare. She poked him with her crutch. I'm asking you a question. Of course we're going to Mamie's for a big meal, Harrison said with a smile. He then added, you look really good today. Boss Meg is back. Georgina completely forgot about the rest of his words. She stood up straight and exclaimed in delight. Yeah. Mamie's is open again today. Didn't you go to your aunt's for lunch today? So I'm taking you for dinner. Harrison nodded. Why didn't you say so earlier? If you had, I wouldn't have gone to my aunt's for lunch. Of course I'm going to eat Mamie's. Georgina was so angry that her cheeks puffed up. She glared at Harrison with a resentful look that said, hurry up and pacify me or I'll explode. Here, as an apology, this is a birthday present for you. Harrison took out a picture album from his pocket. What's this? Georgina took the picture album that was still warm from Harrison. When she saw the cute little mermaid on the cover, her eyes lit up. So cute. After staring at the cover for a while, Georgina looked up at Harrison. This must be very expensive, right? She didn't know much about picture albums, but she knew that full-color picture albums were all hand-drawn by the artists themselves, so they were expensive. Moreover, the cover of this picture album was so beautiful. It must have been drawn by a super good artist, so it must be even more expensive. The most important thing is that you like it. Harrison smiled. Seeing Harrison's warm smile, Georgina's face quickly flushed. Her heart couldn't help but race. She lowered her head and said, I like it a lot. Let's go. Let's find a place to sit for a while. It's still early for dinner. Harrison took Georgina's hand and walked toward the tea house in the distance. Mr. Mac really didn't lie to me. You can't go wrong if you believe in Mr. Mac. Harrison was exhilarated. Sure enough, Georgina liked this picture album. Of course, girls had no resistance to this kind of cute picture album. After racking his brains for an entire month, he finally managed to solve the problem on his birthday. He managed to suppress the heart-shaped stone in his heart. At 5 o'clock in the evening, Amy's opened on time. At this moment, Molly and Xiaowa had already completed their work for the day. They had sold 1,000 copies of the sketchbooks and collected their daily salary of 1,000 copper coins. After having dinner, they headed home. Mr. Mac, is there really no Little Mermaid? It's my daughter's birthday tomorrow, and I want to give it to her as a birthday present, Harold said to Meg when he entered. There will be another 1,000 copies tomorrow. They will be sold at noon. You can come earlier, Meg said with a smile. All right, make sure to leave me a copy, Harold reminded him. He had just seen the picture album held by the customer at the front of the line and was attracted by the beautiful picture album. He thought that his daughter would definitely like such a picture album since it was her birthday tomorrow. Meg nodded slightly. He still had some recollection of the cute daughter of this middle-aged man in the workplace. Her name was Kathy, and she used to come here for breakfast occasionally with Harold. So this picture album was drawn by Mr. Mac's daughter. She's so amazing. Georgina looked at the signboard at the door. She was a little surprised, but she wasn't unhappy at all. That's right, Annie is indeed very powerful. Harrison nodded in agreement. Mr. Mac probably saved the world in his previous life to be so lucky to have 2 such outstanding and cute daughters. Not only did I not save the world in my previous life, but I was also cursed by a bunch of chefs to fall into the sea and drown. Meg thought as he turned around to enter the kitchen. However, he really did save the world in this life. Meg saw a lot of his old friends. Sargeras sat outside the door with his brothers from the Burning Legion. They brought their own metal folding chairs and sat on them. Each of them had lava tattoos on their bodies, and they looked very imposing and eye-catching. However, among such a group of burly men, A little fellow in a white dress sat on the lap of the biggest demon without any fear. She asked softly, "Uncle Big Bald Head, did you use the gift I gave you?" A gentle smile appeared on Sargera's resolute face. He nodded and said, "I used it. It even saved my life." That day in the canyon, if it wasn't for the ice and fire lotus that flew out of the ring that Amy gave him at the last moment and blew up the ancient corpse in front of him, he would probably have fallen at the front line. His life was saved by Amy. The members of the Burning Legion also looked at Amy with doting gazes. "How is it? Isn't it very beautiful?" Amy asked. As brilliant as fireworks." "Then did you defeat the bad guys?" "I defeated a lot of bad guys and saved the world." Sargeras nodded with a smile. "Oh yeah." Amy jumped down from Sargeras's lap happily and ran into the restaurant. "Father. Uncle Big Bald Head said I saved the world." "Little Boss is so cute," Mon said with a silly smile. "From now on, Little Boss will be the favorite of our Burning Legion." "I will kill whoever dares to touch her," Sargeras said with a serious face. The members of the Burning Legion nodded solemnly. This was not a joke. Amy walked around the restaurant and stopped in front of a table by the wall. She looked at the two orcs sitting there and said in surprise, "Blockhead, you're finally here again." "I'm here to eat the rainbow fried rice and also to see little Amy," Haga said with a silly smile. Habing looked up from the pile of food and exclaimed, "How long has it been since we last came? There's so much good food. Mr. Mac is so awesome." Haga and Habing, the two orc brothers, hadn't been to Chaos City for a long time. After the tribe was disbanded, they took a flying steed directly to Rodu to buy some things for the tribe. The first to come was of course Amy's. They couldn't forget Mr. Mac's food. They had sacrificed their lives on the front line, so they wanted to reward themselves with something good when they came back. The restaurant was still the same, but the menu had changed drastically. The variety of food was dazzling. Habing took out an animal tooth dagger from his pocket and handed it to Amy with a smile. "For me?" Amy took the dagger. The small and exquisite dagger was very sharp, and there were patterns engraved on the handle. Could be kept in a leather case. Amy waved the dagger. She looked at Haga and said, "I like it very much." "Thank you, Blockhead." "As long as you like it." Haga smiled. He was also very happy. In the kitchen, Meg looked at this scene with a smile. He turned to Mia, who was about to bring out the dishes, and said, "Get a bottle of rum for the orc brothers at table 12. Tell them it's my treat." Friends came from afar, so good wine was naturally a must. Chapter 2208. "Hello, Mr. Meg." Just as Meg was about to close the door after the dinner service, a light voice sounded. Meg opened the door again, and was surprised to see Gloria standing outside. "I'm here to deliver your clothes." Gloria walked up, and Mars was unloading things from the horse-drawn carriage behind her. "But that black dress is a little complicated. Even though the tailors are already working overtime to make it, I'm afraid it'll take another 2 days to complete." "Are you in a hurry?" Gloria asked a little embarrassedly. "It's all right. Actually, I was just casually mentioning it the other day. These clothes are a little complicated, and the tailors must be tired out in the next 2 days." Meg was a little embarrassed. These clothes were prepared for the actors of the Black Cat Song Troupe. The actors of the Black Cat Song Troupe had good basic skills, but their costumes were really too shabby. You're sitting below the stage watching a story about breaking free from the shackles of a wealthy family to pursue freedom and dreams, and the rich old man on the stage is wearing patched clothes made of coarse cloth. It's really like a play. Meg planned to make a trip to Rodu tomorrow to settle the issue of taking over Saipan Tavern. He also wanted to talk to Miss Black Cat about dreams and the future and give them some gifts. Meg took the clothes from Mars and said to Gloria, "Come in and have a seat." Gloria shook her head slightly and gently said, "No, it's already so late and Mr. Meg just finished work. You must be very tired now. You should rest early. I won't disturb you any longer." "Then you guys should go back earlier. It's cold outside, so I'm sorry to trouble you to come all the way here personally," Mag said embarrassedly. He didn't expect Gloria to be so concerned about this. She was already a famous businesswoman on par with the Hill, a rising star in Chaos City, and the successor of Family Moriton. "I'll ask the craftsman to make the last dress as soon as possible and send it to you." Gloria said goodbye to Meg and left in the carriage. Mag watched the horse-drawn carriage disappear into the distance before he carried the pile of heavy clothes into the restaurant. "That little girl is quite concerned about you." Irina stood beside the counter and looked at Meg with a faint smile. Gloria is indeed a very responsible person for her work, Meg said with a nod without blushing. After putting the clothes on the counter, Meg took out a piece of Chinese clothing and looked at it. The material was excellent, even better than what he had requested. The style was completely designed according to his requirements, and the degree of completion was very high. It seemed that Suede's tailoring team had been strengthened during this period of time. They were able to produce such high-quality products in such a short time. I think everyone from the Black Cat Song Troupe will like it. Meg kept the clothes with satisfaction. This small gift was a little support for those who were chasing their dreams. Helena announced that she would go into seclusion after returning to the Wind Forest. Isn't that a little strange? Irina said as she looked at Meg, who was packing the clothes. She didn't get hurt at the front line, right? Meg was a little surprised. She didn't even meet an opponent that she could take seriously. How could she get hurt? That's indeed a little strange. Meg frowned. The situation in the Wind Forest was a little chaotic now, and it was the kind of chaos that Helena didn't want to see. The existence of the Night Elves had torn apart the hierarchy in the Wind Forest, and the flames of freedom had been ignited everywhere in the Wind Forest. The lower-class elves had started to stand up, and many elves who used to enjoy the treatment of nobles had started to reflect. The threat from Cthulhu had been removed, and the peace agreement had been signed. Logically speaking, the first thing that Helena should have done after returning to the Wind Forest was to start rectifying the chaos. She actually went into seclusion directly? She didn't make any other arrangements? Meg was curious. She only said that everything will be handled by Sally. There are no other arrangements. Irina nodded. Is she really going to lie down and not do anything? Meg had a suspicious look on his face. Although Sally was the princess chosen by Helena, she was also seen as a candidate for the Elven Queen. However, her sympathy for the Night Elves and lower-class elves was obvious to all, and it was not the same as Helena's attitude. Now that she suddenly announced that she was going into seclusion and threw the mess to Sally, he really didn't expect this. What do you plan to do? Meg asked Irina. I don't plan to do anything. Irina shook her head with a smile and said, let Sally try. After all, she's the Elven princess now, and I'm just the lady boss of Mamie's. Meg also smiled when he heard that. Irina didn't want to go back and inherit the Elven Queen's position. If Sally could do it well, it would save her the trouble of taking over the throne again. For some people, power was addictive, but for others, it was just a burden. Irina was obviously the latter, and so was Meg. That was pretty good. Wasn't it better to stay by Mamie's and be a carefree boss and lady boss than to worry about the world's affairs every day? From today onwards, Sean Edward is the crown prince of the Roth Empire, and the only heir to the throne of the Roth Empire. A piece of news spread from the Roth Empire, and attracted the attention of all the races. It was a little surprising, but also within the expectations of all the races. Josh was possessed by a demon, and eventually died at the front line of the icy plains. Although Sean had lost an arm, he still got the crown prince's position for free. As for the third prince, who was obsessed with carpentry, no one would see him as a competitor for the throne. However, the feud between Sean and Alex had also become a matter of concern for many people. Alex had sealed the demon twice, and saved the Norland continent from disaster. He had a very high reputation among all the races. He had once said that he would kill Sean. Now that Andre made Sean the crown prince of the Roth Empire, he probably had the intention of protecting him. If Alex insisted on killing Sean, he would become the archenemy of the Roth Empire. Alex, who was from the Roth Empire, would probably have to think about this carefully. Meg only found out about this when he arrived at Rodu the next day. Are we still going to kill him? Irina asked with a smile. We still have to kill him, but now is indeed not the time, Meg said with certainty with a nod. Saipan Tavern, which had been closed for many days, opened again. Master, you are finally back. Mara exclaimed excitedly as she poked her head out from the second floor. Meg turned back to look at his nominal disciple and smilingly said, I went out to play and am back. Ai Fei also poked half of her head out of the window to look at Meg and his family. She was surprised and surprised. Chapter 2209. Meg sighed as he opened the door of the Saipan Tavern, which had been closed for a few days. When he came to Rodu and bought the shop, he was also in high spirits and wanted to make the Saipan Tavern the best tavern in Rodu. Now, he only wanted to find someone to take over so that he could be carefree. You see, it was always so easy for adults to give up. However, the thriving Romo Street was having a second spring. Meg, who owned half of the street, had already made a lot of profits. Master. Before Meg and the rest sat down, Mara had already run in and greeted everyone. She went up to Meg and said, "I learned how to make pig tongue salad." Really? Meg asked with a smile. Yes, I made one yesterday. Miss said it was delicious and it can be sold now. Mara nodded her head, her face full of confidence. I happen to have pig tongue here. Make one now for me to try. Meg brought Mara into the kitchen and took out a pig tongue from the fridge. There were many standards for how delicious it was. Eiffel's standards were different from Meg's. Mara's talent in cooking was not bad, and she was diligent in her daily practice. However, whether the dishes she made could meet his requirements remained to be tested. All right. Mara took her apron from the side and put it on. Then she washed her hands and began to make the pig tongue salad. Meg stood at the kitchen door and nodded slightly as he watched Mara's familiar movements. It seemed that she had indeed put in a lot of effort in practicing these days. This made Meg feel very gratified. Learning to cook might be a passion at the beginning, but the most difficult thing was to be able to persevere for a long time. Mara's attitude towards cooking was at least proper and serious. The pig tongue was simmering in the pot. Meg looked at the free Mara and asked with a smile, "Cooking requires hard work and practice. What about being a boss? Do you have to be prepared?" Be a boss? Mara blinked and shook her head. No, I really can't learn this. Is the Saipan Tavern planning to reopen? Many customers have been asking about it these days. Eiffel walked in and said with a smile, "I think our miss can do it." Mara immediately shifted the blame and looked at F for help. "Today, I'm here to ask Miss F if she's willing to take over the Saipan Tavern." Meg smiled as he looked at F. He was indeed worried about leaving Saipan Tavern to Mara. But Effie was different. She was a veteran and a smart woman. AI Faye stopped, looked into Meg's eyes and asked seriously, "You really don't want to open this tavern?" From the very beginning, this is a tavern driven by interest. It was purely an accident that the customers liked it. Now, there are more important things waiting for me to do, so this tavern can only be taken care of by someone more suitable. Meg looked at Eiffel. For example, Miss Eiffel. No, it's not an accident that Saipan Tavern is so popular. AI Faye shook his head. Mr. Hades, you're a professional. Regardless of whether it's the location and renovation of the shop, the brewing of wine or the cooking of the dishes, they're all superior to the other taverns in Rodu. No matter who takes over, they won't be able to do as well as you. Meg smiled but didn't say anything. However, AI Faye was telling the truth. No matter who took over Saipan Tavern with Mautai and whiskey in hand, it would be able to maintain its position as one of the top taverns. But that was it. It could only maintain what it had, and it would be difficult for it to reach new heights. This was one of the things that Meg admired about AI Faye. She had a good eye. But there must be something more important that you need to do, so Saipan Tavern can only be the one that's abandoned. AI Faye's expression was a little regretful. Although it was within her expectations, she still felt a little sad when she thought about how she couldn't continue to freeload in the future. Miss AI Faye, you don't have to feel too much pressure because of this. After all, Titan Tavern is also very busy now. If there's no way to handle the pressure of two taverns at the same time, I can find someone else. Meg comforted her, feeling that he had indeed been a little too demanding. AI Faye looked at Meg, took a deep breath, and said as if she had made up her mind, "I'm willing to take over Saipan Tavern." Meg was a little surprised but still smiled. "You're giving too much. I think there should be very few people who can refuse this," AI Faye said as a matter of course. According to Meg's previous promise, if AI Faye was willing to take over Saipan Tavern, she would receive 30% of the shares. With Saipan Tavern's current development, this was a very generous reward. Moreover, Meg would be responsible for the source of the drinks, while AI Faye would be responsible for the overall planning and management of the tavern, which was not difficult for her. Saipan Tavern's reputation had already spread. What she needed to do was to maintain this popularity and let the tavern continue to be popular. If that's the case, then let's directly sign the agreement. Meg took a contract from the counter and directly handed it to AI Faye. AI Faye carefully read the contract. Her expression was a little strange. She looked up at Meg. "You're so sure that I'll take over? I've always been good at reading people." Meg smiled. AI Faye signed the contract without hesitation, and Meg did the same with his name. From now on, after the ice cream shop, Meg had another shop that could make money. This was the so-called after-sleep income. Without doing anything, there would be a steady flow of money. Comfortable. After signing the contract, AI Faye was also one of his people. Meg asked her to stay for dinner while he went into the kitchen to cook. Mara was on the side guarding the pig's tongue in the pot. While watching Meg cook, she said, "Oh right, master, the group leader Vicky you asked me to wait for really came. Is the opera house open?" Meg casually asked. "Yes, it's open. Last night's performance was very successful, the opera house was half full, and the response was very good." Mara nodded, talking about the opera house seemed a little excited. "I have to go practice in the afternoon. You also want to learn opera?" Meg asked with a little surprise. "I just want to learn for fun." Mara was a little guilty, her eyes blurred, and she didn't dare to look at Meg. "It's right to have your own interests, there's nothing to be embarrassed about," Meg said with a smile, guessing the little girl's thoughts. Hearing Meg's words, Mara's eyes lit up again and she nodded. "Opera is really super fun, those opera actors are all very talented, and their singing is very good, I really like it. Yes, after lunch I'm going to go watch a performance. Is there an afternoon performance?" "Yes, there is. There are very few people in the afternoon, and the ticket price is 20% off." Mara nodded. Meg smiled but didn't say anything. He was quite curious what kind of surprise the opera troupe would bring him after moving into the opera house. Carrying the large bag of clothes, he led his family and Mara to the Black Cat Opera House not far away. Soon Meg arrived at Building 101. The once dusty circus venue had been cleaned up and looked brand new. On the door hung a simple wooden board with the words Black Cat Song Troupe. There had been a light drizzle in Rhodey yesterday, and the paint was chipping a little. Well, after moving to a new place, it still gave off a sense of poverty. It was indeed rare to see such a poor opera troupe. The door of the opera house was half open, but there was a wooden sign hanging on the door with the time of the performance. The afternoon performance would start at 1 o'clock. There was still half an hour until now. "I forgot to say that it's not time for the performance to start yet." Mara shrugged in embarrassment. "It's okay. I happen to have something to talk to Miss Vicky about." Meg smiled and walked in first. Mara hurriedly followed. Irina followed in with the two children, and was holding a picture album in her arms. The light in the opera house was a little dim. The sunlight that came in through the small windows was not enough to provide sufficient light. Most likely because of poverty, there were no oil lamps in other places except for the stage. Moreover, they were not lit up at this time. The stage in the center had been simply remodeled. The newly painted countertop looked a little like an opera house. Unfortunately, the seats below the stage were too simple. The long benches were placed, making it look a little crowded and messy. Watching an opera in this kind of environment wasn't going to be a great experience. The opera troupe had just finished their lunch and were about to rest when they heard the commotion at the door. They all looked over. "Hello, it's not time for the afternoon performance yet. Please come back later." Oldme walked over with a smile. "Oldme, this is my master. He's here to look for the troupe leader." Mara jumped out and said to Oldme. Oldme walked closer and finally saw Meg's appearance. His face revealed a hint of surprise. "It's you?" The Black Cat Song Troupe was able to move from a small run-down courtyard to a place where no one cared about them. It was all thanks to this benefactor. Not only did he give them the venue, he also gave them the money to tide them over. Everyone in the opera troupe would remember this kindness. "Troupe leader, our benefactor is here." Oldme turned around and shouted. The opera troupe immediately rushed over. When they saw Meg and his family, they all smiled. This family had left a deep impression on them. The two young ladies were just too adorable. It was hard to forget them. Vicky, who was dressed in a black Lolita dress, quickly walked over from behind the stage. She stopped in front of Meg and smiled. "You're finally back. I heard that your opera troupe has already opened for business, so I wanted to come and take a look. It seems like I'm early." Meg smiled back. Meg still held a hint of respect for this lady with dual personalities. After all, you never knew what kind of personality she would change into in the next moment. "It's true that it's not time yet, but please take a seat here. I still haven't thanked you properly about the opera troupe." Vicky led Meg and the others to the troupe leader's office at the back. Although it was called the troupe leader's office, it was just a simple and crude office. There was a wooden table with a broken leg and two long benches. Vicky's seat was an old wooden chair. It was probably used as the boss's chair. "The opera troupe has just opened, so it's a little shabby. Please excuse me," Vicky said frankly. She didn't feel inferior at all. "It's good to have a place to sit." Meg's impression of her improved a little. Thank you for providing the venue for the Black Cat Song Troupe and providing so much support. Vicky bowed to Meg and said gratefully, "You're welcome. Your talent moved me." Meg waved his hand with a smile. "Besides, isn't this a mutually beneficial business?" Vicky smiled as well. However, the gratitude she felt towards Meg didn't decrease. Meg's investment and support for the opera troupe was no different from sending charcoal in snowy weather. He had saved them from a quagmire and pulled them back from the brink of disbandment. Vicky would always remember this kindness in her heart. "Actually, there's another reason for my visit. And has already drawn the story of Miss Black Cat. Take a look and see if it matches your expectations," Meg said, and went forward and handed the album to Vicky. Chapter 22:11. You're done? Vicky was a little surprised. After all, it had only been a few days, but she still reached out to take the picture book. The cover was Miss Black Cat, who was climbing over the wall of the castle to escape at night. Miss Black Cat, who was sitting on the wall, seemed to symbolize something. She was not only looking over the wall, but also the shackles of the secular rules. Beyond the high wall there was freedom. Vicky looked at the cover of the picture book for a long time, and a slight smile appeared on her face. The picture was exquisite and beautiful, and Miss Black Cat was very similar to her. Most importantly, the scene of her climbing over the high wall was chosen as the cover, and it was really to her liking. Then she flipped open the picture book and read it carefully. The story in the picture book was a little different from the opera. Some adjustments were made to the order, but it did not affect the story at all. In fact, it was more suitable to be told in a picture book. Part of the content was also deleted. After all, operas sometimes had very long singing parts. The picture book simplified this aspect, making the story more concise and clear. About 10 minutes later, Vicky finished half of the picture book. She gently closed the picture book in her hand, and stood up to look at Anne and said seriously, "Thank you very much for giving this story a new life," and was slightly surprised and then smiled happily. She said in sign language, "It was you who created this story. I'm very honored to be able to draw it. The drawing is so good, it completely exceeded my expectations. I like it very much and I'm very satisfied," Vicky affirmed again. "Thank you." Anne smiled reservedly, but it was obvious that she was very happy. Meg's lips curled up. This feeling of being recognized by the original author should be good. It seemed that drawing comics was indeed very suitable for Anne, and it could let her gain more recognition. Since Miss Vicky is very satisfied with Anne's drawing, then let's talk about the licensing of the picture book's copyright. Meg looked at Vicky and said, "Mr. Hades, are you planning to print this picture book?" Vicky asked. "Yes, I think this is an excellent picture book. Whether it's the core of the story or the style, it's very good." Meg nodded. "Recently, I've been trying my hand at the picture book business. This is a good start." Vicky looked at Meg and thought. In the dungeon, copyright was highly valued, and authorization was protected by a series of strict regulations. Outstanding works could often obtain good licensing revenue. However, on the Norland continent, the laws and regulations in this area weren't very complete. Although there was the concept of copyright exclusivity, there didn't seem to be many cases of cross-industry licensing. The story of Miss Black Cat had a very special feeling for Vicky, but Anne's drawing was so good that it perfectly showed the core of the story. If this story was spread in the form of a picture book, it should receive a good response and sales in the market. It would bring some popularity to the Black Cat Opera House. Moreover, she was still short of money. Whether it was the renovation of the opera house or the recruitment of new actors, she urgently needed a large sum of money. "Mr. Hades, how do you intend to cooperate?" Vicky asked. Although she didn't know Meg's background, she felt that he was a trustworthy partner. Meg directly said, "Regarding the exclusive licensing of the picture book copyright of Miss Black Cat's story, I have two options for you to choose from. 1. A direct buyout of 5 million copper coins. In other words, if I give you 5 million copper coins, I will get the copyright of Miss Black Cat's picture book. After that, I don't have to pay you any fees. 2. After deducting the cost from the sales volume, I will give you 20% of the profits. This is a long-term income with unknown and uncertainties. However, it may also bring you some unexpected gains." 5 million copper coins. Vicky's mind went blank. This was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for her, who used to think about how to support a troupe for a day with 1 copper coin. Even though she had returned to the dungeon this time, the proud her still didn't intend to rely on any help from her family. She had thought that Meg might ask for tens of thousands of copper coins, or even 100,000 copper coins to close the deal. 100,000 copper coins could be used to make a simple upgrade of the opera house. At least it could be used to replace the shabby long benches and upgrade the lights. It could also be used to provide a sturdy bed for every troupe member. She didn't expect Meg to offer a sky-high price of 5 million copper coins. Before this, Miss Black Cat was just a story that no one cared about, and it was almost a story that amused itself. Even now, the story's popularity was limited to the neighbors on Romo Street. Meg was offering too much. Meg smiled and looked at her without rushing her. He could tell that Vicky's identity wasn't simple, but she had a stubborn personality. He didn't know what choice she would make. Are you talking about 5 million copper coins? Vicky looked at Meg with uncertainty. Yes, this is the price that I can offer now. Meg nodded. This had far exceeded the copyright fees of all the picture books on the market. Did Vicky still think that it wasn't enough? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Miss Black Cat's story was indeed good. For the picture book market where men and women were in love, it had a strong tearing effect. He could consider adding a little more. You think it's too little? Meg asked. No. Vicky shook her head. After realizing that Meg seemed to have misunderstood, she quickly said, 5 million copper coins is too much. I'm asking if you need to think about it again. As you said, there's a lot of uncertainty. Although the opera troupe was indeed short of money, Vicky didn't want to cheat Mr. Hades. After all, he was the one who pulled the Black Cat Song troupe out of the mud pit and gave them new soil to grow on. I'm a businessman. Any decision is made after careful consideration. Since I can offer you 5 million, it means that you're worth the price. Meg smiled. His impression of Vicky improved a lot. This little girl was young, but she had a very good outlook on life. Seeing that Meg didn't look reluctant, Vicky thought for a while and said, then I choose the first plan. 5 million copper coins to buy the picture book copyright of Miss Black Cat. She could do a lot with 5 million copper coins, and it was money she earned with her own talent. It was no pressure to spend it on the opera troupe. Are you sure you don't want to consider the share plan? Meg smiled. Well, the opera troupe is in urgent need of money now. I think this is a better choice. Vicky nodded firmly. Maybe the share plan was more imaginative, but the opera troupe needed a certain amount of money. Chapter 22:12. The signing of the agreement went very smoothly. Meg had already prepared the contract. The two signed it and pressed their fingerprints, and the contract came into effect. Meg took out the banknotes that he had already prepared and gave them to Vicky. He explained, these are banknotes from Buffett Banks. You can go to Buffett Banks and exchange them for cash. Okay, thank you very much. Vicky stood up and bowed deeply to Meg. Meg could be said to be a great benefactor that she had met at the lowest point of her life. You're welcome. After all, I am also one of the shareholders of the Black Cat Song troupe. I also hope that the opera troupe can become better. Meg said with a smile. He took the package from the side and said, there are some clothes inside. I saw that the costumes of the actors of the opera troupe were very old, so I custom-made a batch of costumes for them. Most of them were made according to Anne's comics. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Vicky opened the package and looked at the gorgeous clothes. Her eyes lit up. Now, almost all the costumes of the opera troupe were made by themselves. There was no other way. The conditions were limited. If any of the costumes were custom-made, they would cost thousands of copper coins. Originally, after receiving the money, the first thing she had planned to do was to change the costumes for the troupe. She did not expect Meg to be so considerate as to prepare costumes for everyone. Your dress is a bit complicated. It's not ready yet. I'll have someone send it to you in a few days, Meg continued. Vicky's black Lolita dress also looked a bit old, but the layers of black did not look too obvious. I'm fine. Vicky blushed when she heard that Meg was going to send her a dress. I'll rent this opera house to your opera troupe for 5 years at the price of 1 copper coin. I'll also reserve the 2 buildings next door for you. If you want to expand the venue, you can come to me at any time. Meg glanced at his watch. It's almost time for your performance. We'll wait outside. I think it'll take some time for you to get changed. Mr. Hades, thank you and your family for supporting the Black Cat Song troupe. Vicky stood up and bowed to Meg and his family. Meg waved his hand and left the office. Vicky called the members backstage and distributed the clothes that Meg had brought. Commander, when did you order new costumes for us? Old Me looked at the gorgeous costumes in his hands. He was pleasantly surprised. Yeah, this material feels really comfortable to the touch. It must be very expensive, right? Whoa. It fits perfectly. Everyone chimed in and was very satisfied with the costumes. I didn't order this for everyone. It was a gift from Mr. Hades. Vicky smiled. She didn't expect Mr. Hades to be so considerate. He even made everyone's measurements just right. Wow, this boss is so nice. Not only did he give us the venue, he even prepared costumes for us. Yeah, if it wasn't for him, we would still be starving in that lousy courtyard. But Commander, you're not going to sell us out, are you? Everyone sighed. They looked at Vicky and couldn't help but ask this question. They had experienced the fickleness of human nature over the past 2 years. They knew that there was no such thing as unconditional love in this world. Mr. Hades has invested in our troupe so he can be considered one of the bosses behind the scenes. However, he won't interfere with the management of the troupe. Don't worry, I won't give up control of the troupe, Vicky consoled them with a smile. Everyone let out a sigh of relief when they heard this. After all, the Mecha troupe had tried to swallow them up before, and had even poached a few of their members. Now they had a new boss. However, this wouldn't affect the troupe in any way. On the contrary, they felt like they had gained a backer. The remaining outfits should be for Ah Bao and the others, right? Ibaka looked at the remaining outfits in the bag with a complicated expression. Everyone looked at the remaining 6 or 7 outfits in the bag, and thought of their companions who had accompanied them day and night. Their spirits sank. Why are you still thinking about those traitors? They were no longer part of our Black Cat Song troupe the moment they left, Old Me said angrily. Don't say that. Abao and the others have gone through thick and thin with us. The troupe was already forced into a corner. Even if they hadn't left, I would have brought them to join the Mecha troupe. After all, survival is more important than anything else. Vicky shook her head. I'm going to have a chat with them in a few days. If they're willing to return, I hope that everyone will accept them as usual. Every member of the opera troupe had been brought back by Vicky. She had spent 2 years with them and taught them how to become professional opera singers from beginners. The feeling she had for them and the energy she had put into them made it impossible for her to give up on any of them. Now that she had the capital as well as the opera house, it was time to invite back the members who had been poached. The opera troupe was severely understaffed. Each person was practically working as two, and the completion rate of the opera had dropped significantly. If she could recruit the members who had left, this situation would be greatly alleviated. She also had to consider a long-term plan to nurture opera singers. Opera singers had a lifespan, and a professional opera troupe needed a steady stream of new talent. That's right. The night before Fourth Sister left, she was sleeping on the same bed as me. She was so hungry that she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. She woke up to drink water several times. She even asked me softly if we could eat more if there were fewer people, Ibaka said with a sigh. Everyone fell silent. That period of time was indeed hard to bear. Everyone had considered leaving. Vicky clapped her hands. All right, everyone. Change into your outfits and get ready to perform. Sir, I've asked around and finally found out that the Black Cat Song troupe has moved here. Took a lot of effort. Outside the opera house, Pascal said to the young man beside him with a fawning expression. Bobby, who was dressed in luxurious clothes, looked at the wooden plaque hanging high up and frowned. Didn't you say that they couldn't hold on any longer? Why did they suddenly move to Romo Street and build such a big opera house? Pascal's expression stiffened. He rolled his eyes and said, I'm guessing that they moved here without permission. Hasn't Romo Street been completely deserted in the past 2 years? It used to be the venue of a circus, but it was abandoned and no one cared about it. They most likely moved here on their own accord, just like the shabby courtyard that no one wanted. That's not impossible. Bobby nodded. He was well aware of the Black Cat Song troupe situation. Even food was a problem. It didn't make sense for them to suddenly have the money to rent such a big venue. Be polite when you go in later, but you must make Vicky agree to join your Marca Song troupe. Bobby tidied up his clothes and walked into the opera house. Of course. Don't worry. Pascal patted his chest. Chapter 22:13. Bobby walked into the opera house, and the sudden darkness made him a little uncomfortable. He tripped on the leg of a chair and almost fell down. Be careful, sir. Pascal hurriedly reached out to support him, but he was secretly delighted. It seemed that he had guessed right. The Black Cat Song troupe was as poor as ever. It was almost time for the show to start, but the opera house was still pitch black. They didn't even dare to light a lamp. Although they had moved indoors, there probably weren't many guests willing to come to this place. Most of their troupe still had to eat dirt to survive. But speaking of which, the actors that were poached from the Black Cat Song troupe last time were really useful. Not to mention their professionalism, they didn't eat much and they didn't ask for much. Now they were basically the pillars of their Marca Song troupe. Although Boca gave a lot of money, the reason why he was so diligent in following the Black Cat Song troupe was because he wanted to poach the remaining actors as well. As for the woman who wasn't easy to control, it would be best if Boca could take her away. He couldn't help but be afraid when he thought of the day when she scratched his face full of bloody marks. He didn't understand why Sir Boca liked this kind of thing. Why did he like to be beaten up? Don't let people know that we know each other. Boca pulled his hand out of Pascal's hand and rearranged his clothes. Yes. Pascal nodded and took 2 quick steps forward. The opera house wasn't small. After all, it had inherited the original circus. But the long benches, no matter how neatly they were arranged, still looked a little shabby. Except for a few audience members sitting in the front row and other seats, the whole place was empty and particularly deserted. Boca glanced around and sighed inwardly. Even if they moved to Romo Street, the Black Cat Song troupe still had no customers. Some time ago, 2 taverns on this street won the gold medal of the wine tasting conference and attracted a lot of attention. Even he went to the Titan Tavern to drink with his friends. When Pascal brought him here today, he was worried that Vicky had found a sugar daddy, but now it seemed that it was more like what Pascal had said. It was likely that the Black Cat Song troupe had taken advantage of this empty house to temporarily occupy it as a theater. Miss Vicky is a girl of noble character. She must have her reasons for doing something like this. I'm too useless for letting a weak girl like her suffer like this. Bobby fell into deep self-blame. There aren't many people in the afternoon, but the leader still insists on having 2 matches a day, Mara explained to Meg. Well, it's good to practice more. Meg nodded and glanced at the empty opera house. His eyes fell on Pascal and Bobby, who entered the theater one after another. Father, isn't that the leader of the opera troupe that we slept with last time? Amy whispered. Yeah. A smile appeared on Mag's face. He also remembered the person walking in front. It was the leader of the opera troupe that they went to for the first time. If he remembered correctly, it was called the Marca Song troupe. The level of the actors was quite amateur. They slacked off a lot in their performances and sang to make people fall asleep. The only praiseworthy thing was that it was really easy to sleep with. If he had to give a guide, it would be, please bring your own quilt and pillow. Speaking of which, this person should be a competitor of the Black Cat Song troupe. Why was he here? Was he here to cause trouble? Mag took another look at the well-dressed young master behind them. He had overheard the conversation between the 2 of them, and it seemed like this was the real deal. As the behind-the-scenes shareholder of the Black Cat Song troupe, Meg sat calmly and was ready to watch the show. What a joke. Miss Black Cat was not a kitten that could be trampled on. She could lead a group of old and weak women and children to mingle in the underworld. She was not someone who could be easily bullied. In comparison, that young master looked like he could not even stand a gust of wind. Pascal walked to the front of the stage and looked around. When he did not see anyone, he walked straight to the backstage. Boca found a seat in the front row and sat down. He looked calm, but his right leg trembled subconsciously, revealing his inner nervousness. My friend, this is the backstage. You fat piece of paper. What are you doing here again? Pascal had just lifted the curtain when a loud roar came from behind him. Pascal's hand trembled and the curtain fell. He could not help but take 2 steps back. This leader is not very good. Meg frowned slightly. He was actually pushed back by a little soldier. The curtain was lifted again and Uncle Ibaka, who was dressed in luxurious black clothes, strode out. He looked at Pascal with a dignified aura even without being angry. Uncle Ibaka played the role of Miss Black Cat's father in the opera. He was a rich and powerful man. Ibaka, who was in character, stood there. His imposing manner made Pascal speechless for a moment. Who is this person? Boca was also carefully sizing up Ibaka. This man was dressed in luxurious clothes and had a dignified look between his brows. He was even more imposing than his father. You're the actor playing the role of the old master. Pascal looked at him for a while before recognizing Ibaka's identity. He was amused and annoyed at the same time. He did not expect to be intimidated by a mere actor. Where did this scoundrel come from? Don't you know where you are? How dare you act so presumptuously here? At this time, another loud voice sounded from behind the curtain. A woman in luxurious clothes and elegant makeup walked out from behind the curtain. She looked at Pascal coldly and scolded him. Pascal shrunk his neck in fear. Even the madam of an official's family might not have such an imposing manner. He could not help but size her up carefully. Although Maca Opera House had always been lukewarm, he had seen a lot of upper-class people. He was still a bit sensitive to the clothes of the rich. This woman's clothes and aura were a bit more noble than many noble ladies. Yo, the actors have all changed into new clothes today. An old man next to him chuckled. Pascal came back to his senses. This was not a noble lady. She was just an actress who was used to playing the role of a noble lady and had changed into a noble lady's clothes. Not expecting to be intimidated by two actors in a row, Pascal could not help but be furious. He said in exasperation, "You, get away from me. Get away." A contemptuous sneer sounded. The curtain was lifted and Vicky walked out. She looked at Pascal and said coldly, "Who do you think you are?" The petite Vicky stood in the middle of a group of actors, but it was difficult to hide her sharpness. Her disdainful gaze was like a young lady standing in the clouds looking down at the rotten fish and shrimps on the ground. It was like the arrival of a young lady. That feeling. Chapter 22:14. In the past, Pascal had proudly looked down on the Black Cat Song Troupe, who were dressed in rags and had pale faces. That was the feeling of superiority of a successful person. But now, looking at the extravagantly dressed actors surrounding Vicky, the once weak people were now glowing, and that feeling of superiority suddenly disappeared. Under everyone's gaze he even felt a sense of inferiority. Even if he used his butt to think, he could tell that the Black Cat Song Troupe had most likely met a big financial backer. Not to mention other things, just the luxurious costumes alone cost tens of thousands of copper coins to customize. In that case, this opera house might not be occupied by them, but rented directly. Cough cough. Leader Vicky, why are you so distant? Didn't we have a few friendly conversations before? I'm Pascal, the leader of the Marca Song Troupe. Several of your companions are now members of our troupe. Even if you're rich now and have met a big financial backer, you can't turn your back on us. Pascal quickly smiled. The situation was not quite what he had imagined. The promise he had made to Boca before was most likely going to fall through. He had to think of another way to try. After all, his financial backer was watching from behind and he had to perform well. Meg looked at this scene and the corners of his mouth curled up. The development of this plot was a little different from what he had imagined. But this fat leader was quite discerning. He knew how to steer with the wind and was not a reckless pig. But his ability to speak still needed to be improved. On the side, Boca heard Pascal's words and looked at the extravagantly dressed actors. He clenched his fists and his body could not help but tremble. Angry, trembling, cold. He felt as if he had suddenly been stripped naked and thrown into a world of ice and snow, and the world was far away from him. In the end, had she gone to find another financial backer? In order to let the actors wear gorgeous costumes, let them eat their fill, and let them have a stage to shelter them from the wind and rain. But why didn't she come to him? Why did she find someone else? He felt pain. He opened his mouth. But he could not say a word. But it didn't matter that he could not speak. The opera troupe was full of anger, and after hearing Pascal's words, they immediately exploded. They were just missing those friends who had left in difficult times, and now one of the culprits was here to show off. I didn't hit you because I want to leave a good impression on the audience, Ibaka said as he looked coldly at Pascal. But you'd better not let us see you outside the theater, or your face will bloom, I promise, the madam next to him said. Pascal took 2 steps back in fear and his expression changed slightly. These people, after eating their fill, they became so scary. Pascal looked at Vicky with a serious expression, and said, Actually, I'm here today to talk about cooperation with leader Vicky. We're all in the same industry and in Rodu there are only 2 opera troupes. Now no one knows much about opera. If we can combine forces and work together to let more people know what opera is, we can expand the pie together. Isn't that a good idea? And not only do other people not know what opera is, you probably don't even know what opera is, Vicky said coldly. It was not that she looked down on Pascal, but the Marca Opera Troupe's professional standards were a complete disgrace to opera. People went to watch opera full of anticipation, but ended up having a good night's sleep. When they woke up, they would only remember that they had a good night's sleep. Who would spend money to watch an opera in the future? This guy who only thought about making money from the audience was a cancer in the opera industry. You can insult me, but you can't insult my professional standards, Pascal said seriously. Talking about opera with you is an insult to the performance itself. Vicky pursed her lips. You. Pascal was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Now that the Black Cat Song Troupe was living a prosperous life, he could no longer see any desire for food in their eyes. It was clearly unrealistic to try to seduce them to join the Marca opera troupe. With Vicky's attitude, it was also impossible for the two opera troupes to combine forces. Pascal said angrily, "Don't think that everything will be fine just because you've found a tycoon. Let's see how much time you have left to perform on stage in the future." Vicky's face turned cold, and a hint of killing intent appeared in her almond-shaped eyes. However, before she could say anything, a low voice sounded in the audience. "Shut up. You shut up." Boca suddenly stood up and the bench was overturned. He clenched his fists and looked at Vicky with a pained and conflicted expression. When Boca spoke, Pascal immediately cowered. He said submissively, "Mr. Boca, she's with someone else. Get out of here." Boca roared at him. Pascal immediately stepped aside, not daring to make another sound. Meg and his family were already munching on sunflower seeds. They crossed their legs and calmly watched the foreplay. Boca's expression changed several times, switching between pain, relief, conflict, and forgiveness. All the opera actors present felt ashamed of their inferiority. "Miss Vicky, I didn't know that you had such a rich friend. You never told me because you were afraid that I would overthink. You're always thinking about me. You're so good to me. I like you more and more." Boca looked at Vicky affectionately and said, "Seriously?" Meg raised his eyebrows and stared at Boca with his head tilted. "Hey, is this what you mean by affectionate?" Irina also said with a smile. "No. This can only be called a bootlicker," Meg thought. Vicky showed some disgust and looked at Boca coldly. "I've already made it very clear that I don't like you. Please disappear from my sight. If you try to disgust me with such a despicable person again, I won't let you go." Boca staggered 2 steps forward and clutched his chest. He said in pain, "Don't push me away. I want to see you every day. You can choose the location, whether it's the forest, the desert, the lake at night, the grassland, the sea, or the street with the mist in the morning. Just don't dream anymore. Go back and wash up and sleep early. You can have everything in your dreams," Vicky said coldly. Boca was stunned. He looked at Vicky in a daze. Tears fell from the corners of his eyes uncontrollably. He heard the sound of something breaking. It was probably his heart. "Maybe he's better and more suitable for you. Then go, I'll let you go, but remember, if you want to come back one day, I'll still be here waiting for you. I'll always be waiting for you. You're weak. Ask him to be gentle. My heart will ache." Boca sobbed. "Crawl." Vicky grabbed a stool nearby. "Leader, calm down." The actors hurriedly pulled her back. "Young master, let's go first." Pascal also hurried forward to help Boca stagger out. "That dazed look, he's like a dog," Amy said as she looked at Boca's back. Meg nodded in agreement. In the end, there was nothing left. Chapter 22:15. Boca left the theater with Pascal's help, looking very much like a dog with a broken heart. Meg looked at Vicky, who had put down the stool and regained her composure, and smiled. This girl was quite sensible. She had rejected him clearly, but the bootlicker was too persistent. Mara ran to the door to help sell the tickets. As a part-time tool of the opera house, she could be trained by the actors for free by helping to sell the tickets. 10 minutes later, Miss Black Cat opened. There were only a dozen guests in the theater. However, the actors who had changed into new costumes still presented a wonderful opera to the audience. "This opera is quite interesting." Irina looked at the actors on the stage with a smile. She did not go to the opera with them last time, so it was her first time watching an opera performance. Elves are good at singing and dancing. It might be good to set up an elven opera troupe. Meg suggested seriously. It was a tradition of the elves. Almost every night when the weather was good, there would be a lively singing and dancing party in the open space of the textile factory. Meg also liked to watch the beautiful elven girls dance gracefully and sing songs that sounded like the sounds of nature. Of course, it was the children's request. Irina thought seriously for a while and nodded. "That's a good idea. It would be even better if we could arrange an opera with the night elves as the theme. About the script of the opera, we can discuss it with leader Vicky. I don't think there is anyone more professional than her in this aspect." Meg glanced at Vicky, who was walking towards them after getting off the stage. "Mr. Hades, is your family satisfied with the performance?" Vicky walked up and asked with a smile. "It was a wonderful performance." Meg nodded. The actors in the new costumes made the performance more natural, and there were fewer scenes. But what about the other actors? Why are there so many of them? The opera troupe originally had 15 or 16 people, but today, including Mara who had no lines, there were only 9 of them on the stage. Vicky smiled. They are temporarily separated, but I believe they will return soon. Meg nodded thoughtfully. It must have something to do with Pascal, which was why the opera troupe was so angry with him. However, even in the absence of a large number of people, Vicky and the others still presented a highly completed opera. Sister Vicky, you guys must be very rich, right? Amy asked curiously. Vicky was slightly taken aback and immediately smiled sweetly. Xiao Ai, do I look like a young lady from a rich family? Yes. Amy nodded firmly. Maybe. Vicky nodded with a smile, not saying anything. The performance tonight will start a little later. I'll treat your family to dinner to thank you for your help, Vicky said. Why don't we eat at our place? I'll cook. It's more comfortable to eat at home, Meg suggested. Will it be too much trouble for you? It's fine. I quite like to cook. Then I won't stand on ceremony and freeload, Vicky said with a smile. Meg and his family returned to the tavern first, and he asked Mara and Eiffel to come over for dinner that night. Irina walked around the tavern, opened the back door, and looked at the flowers and plants that were growing well in the yard. She said regretfully, I've lived here for a month, and I can't bear to give it up just like that. Meg walked behind her with a smile and said, then we'll come and stay here for a few days every month. Just treat it as a vacation home and keep it. Irina's eyes lit up and she said with a smile, that's a good suggestion. It's suitable to take care of the flowers and plants once a month. New mission, enhance the relationship between neighbors. As the old saying goes, close neighbors are better than distant relatives. Host, please cook for your neighbors to enhance their relationship. Amy, who was tying Ugly Duckling's hair, suddenly received a mission from the system. Stupid system, this will only destroy the relationship between neighbors. Amy retorted, unmoved. Life experience system, why don't you change the mission to alienate neighbors? That way, I'll just have to cook for them every day, Amy continued. As a heaven-chosen host, how can I give up so easily? Good neighborhood relationships need to be managed, and this is also a part of life experience. Host, please work hard to complete the mission. Knock knock. Knocking sounds came from the door. Amy got up and ran toward the door and she tiptoed to open the door. Wow. Big Sister Eiffel, you're so beautiful today. Xiao Ai likes you so much. I want a hug. Really? Xiao Ai is so cute too. Come, let Big Sister give you a hug. Eiffel smiled like a flower and bent down to pick up Amy. She couldn't help but plant a kiss on Amy's tender cheek. Favorable impression from Eiffel plus 99. Life experience system, young system? In the end, it was still taught a lesson by a young host. Enhance the relationship between neighbors. Mission cancelled. A line of small words silently slid past. Eiffel came with Mara, and Mara followed behind with 2 bottles of wine in her hands. You didn't have to bring anything. As the hostess, Irina smiled and said politely, I feel a little embarrassed to come here every day for free meals. Eiffel hugged Amy and said with a smile, 1 bottle is brewed by me, and the other bottle is a cellar wine brewed by my father. Towards this beautiful wife of Mr. Hades, Effie could not feel the slightest bit of jealousy, other than envy. After all, she was too beautiful, and even as a woman, she couldn't help but want to take a few more glances at her. In comparison, Mr. Hades was the one who had the advantage. Moreover, his 2 daughters were also smart and cute. Although they were still young, it could be seen that they would definitely grow up to be as beautiful as their mother. It was just a pity that she didn't even have the chance to be a concubine. No, I'm Eiffel. How can I be a concubine? Eiffel chased out the messy thoughts in her mind and corrected her worldview. Vicky followed behind her, also carrying a small box in her hand. Group leader? Mara warmly greeted. Mara, Miss Eiffel, you guys are also here. Vicky was a little surprised. Because of Mara, she also recognized Eiffel. Moreover, Titan Tavern was now the most famous tavern on Romo Street, and Eiffel had also introduced many guests to the opera house. Yes, today is another day of freeloading. Eiffel smiled and nodded. She felt that she had already gotten used to the feeling of freeloading. When she thought about how Mr. Hades and his family might not appear for a long time in the future, she felt an indescribable sense of emptiness in her heart. She didn't know if it was because she couldn't continue to freeload or because of other reasons. Chapter 22:16. Vicky gave the gift to Irina. She hadn't seen her face clearly due to the dim light, but now that she had a closer look, she couldn't help but praise, "You're so beautiful." Delicate skin, exquisitely carved face, full breasts. With such good looks and a good figure, even women couldn't help but fall in love with her. No wonder AI and Ni were so beautiful and cute. She didn't quite understand when she first saw Mr. Hades, but now the case had been solved. She had completely inherited her mother's perfect genes. You too. It would be even better if you could grow taller. Irina accepted the gift with a smile. She glanced at Vicky's chest and restrained herself. Vicky's lips twitched. She was a little angry, but she decided to let it go for the sake of her face. After all, she was so beautiful. Yes, I think I'll grow taller. After all, I'm still young. Vicky nodded. Age was her biggest advantage. After all, she didn't look much older than Anne. Yes, you are a little small. Irina nodded. Vicky, she tried to straighten her chest, trying to prove that she wasn't small. That's all right. I'll give you a good prescription one day and I guarantee that you'll grow up faster. Effie put her arm around Vicky's shoulder with a smile and whispered in her ear. Don't touch me. Vicky tilted her head and asked in a low voice, Really? Personally tested, it's effective. Effie laughed so hard that the gigantic abyss trembled as well. Vicky looked at the abyss and immediately put on a smile. It's all up to you, big sister. The women chatted and the atmosphere was quite harmonious. Meg was cooking in the kitchen. He looked back at Irina with a smile. Irina didn't have many friends. Perhaps it was because of her identity, but apart from Phyllis, she didn't have any close friends. When she communicated with others, she was more or less distant. However, after she removed her identity as the elven princess and talked to others as the tavern owner, it was more like she was making friends. It was pretty good. Even though he could see all the mountains in the clouds, it was still too lonely and boring. Walking down from the clouds and stepping into the mundane world, he was able to experience happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy even more, adding a bit of vitality. Meg made quite a number of dishes such as grilled fish, braised beef, and a beggar's chicken that had been stripped of its mud casing in the kitchen. There were also a few dishes that he had made simple but effective changes to Mamie's recipes. After all, Amy's was famous. Meg didn't want them to simply associate the two together. He just needed to make some simple changes and use self-study as an excuse. Gulp. Vicky couldn't help but gulp at the sight of all the delicious dishes on the table. What kind of celestial man was this? She had actually cooked up such a sumptuous dinner in the kitchen alone, and it looked so tempting. Originally, she didn't expect much from Meg when he said that he would cook at home. However, since it was proposed by her sugar daddy, she couldn't refuse. But he didn't expect to see such a table of dishes. Even at the high-class banquets in the underground city, she didn't feel such a desire for food. After all, those delicate-looking dishes were actually mediocre in taste, and they didn't have such a direct and stimulating aroma attack. Mr. Hades, if you're going to open a restaurant someday, please let me know. That way I'll be able to provide for all three of my meals. AI Faye looked at Mag with a serious expression. Although Mara had also learned a few tricks from Hades, and her culinary skills had improved greatly, she was still a far cry from Hades' standard. Thinking that she wouldn't be able to freeload such delicious food in the future, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. Actually, my culinary skills are just average. If AI Faye really wants to try delicious food, you can go to Mamie's in Rodu. The dishes made by Mr. Meg are the real delicacies in the world, Meg said with a faint smile. Irina glanced at him. Is it all right for me to praise myself? Is Mamie's very famous? Vicky asked curiously. It's super famous. It's said to be the most delicious restaurant on the Norland continent. The head chef, Mr. Meg, is also the most charming man on the Norland continent. Mara answered quickly. She glanced at Meg and added, Of course, it's still not as good as my master. Meg nodded slightly. This double bootlicking was very effective on him. Seems like we can try it when we're free. Vicky nodded. But it's far away. It's in Chaos City. I heard it takes about a month to get there, Mara said regretfully. She had to try it even if they didn't let her. All right, everyone should be hungry. Let's eat, Meg said with a smile. Even with his thick skin, he couldn't stand too much bootlicking. Meg picked up 2 pieces of chicken for Amy and Anne, and then began to eat the grilled fish. Vicky only picked up her chopsticks when she saw Meg starting to eat, and picked up a piece of braised beef in front of her. The braised beef that was cut into cubes looked red and alluring. The rich aroma of the meat wafted over, and Vicky, who had been eating fast food for a few days, broke her defense instantly. She couldn't take it anymore. She stuffed a big piece of braised beef into her mouth, and her little cheeks puffed up instantly. However, she couldn't care less about her table manners. She bit into the braised beef, and the gravy burst in her mouth instantly. That wonderful texture made her taste buds go wild, and her soul rose to the sky. This feeling of being filled up, it was simply too blissful. She chewed and swallowed. The large piece of meat was quickly swallowed into her stomach. This is too good. Eat it. Vicky's eyes were filled with tears. Even though she was born into a wealthy family, and had eaten countless delicacies in the eyes of ordinary people, she had never felt so satisfied with food. It was clearly just an ordinary piece of beef that could be bought for a few dozen copper coins at a street corner market, but Hades had turned it into an extremely delicious dish. Only after eating the braised beef today did she realize that meat actually tasted like this. Vicky's gaze toward Meg also changed a little. He had changed from a rich uncle to a good man with full marks for cooking. Wasn't a good man who could cook? If there was a man who could cook such delicious braised beef for her every day, she would also be willing to marry him. After eating 3 pieces of beef and a few mouthfuls of rice, Vicky felt that her stomach was finally satisfied. Then, her gaze fell on the plate of grilled chicken that had been cut up. The tender grilled chicken skin was slightly yellow, and the chicken skin was slightly oily. It looked like it should be crispy, but the chicken still maintained its tender and juicy state. She picked up a piece of chicken and bit into it together with the skin. The skin was very fragrant, crispy, and didn't stick to her teeth. The chicken was indeed tender and the meat was juicy. The seasoning was also very flavorful. The grilling experience was different from the braised beef in one bite. Ah! Vicky opened her legs slightly and couldn't help but let out a sigh. This was too good. Chapter 22:17. The delicious roast chicken shocked Vicky so much that she almost lost control. After swallowing the chicken, she closed her legs and blushed. It was too shameful. As a lady who had been educated as a socialite since she was young, how could she have such a reaction in front of other men? Is it delicious? Ify looked at her with a smile. Her reaction was not much better than Vicky's when she tasted Hades's food for the first time. The delicious food seemed to have some kind of magical power. No matter how much self-control one had, they still could not control themselves when they tasted it for the first time. It's delicious? Vicky nodded. That was an undeniable fact. Mr. Hades's culinary skills are too amazing. It's amazing. Vicky looked at Mag with a serious expression, and said, "If you're going to open a restaurant, please let me know." Okay. Meg nodded with a smile. After eating the roast chicken and roast fish, Vicky felt that she was a fickle woman. Her preferences seemed to change all the time, and this change was only because she tasted the next dish. Perhaps it was because the food was too delicious, the atmosphere was very harmonious. They talked and laughed and their relationships became much closer. Vicky, other than Miss Black Cat's opera, did your opera troupe prepare any other operas? Irina looked at Vicky and asked curiously. Yes, we prepared about 5 operas. Vicky nodded and shrugged helplessly. But because of the loss of the opera singers, only Miss Black Cat can perform. Were they poached by the fat captain this afternoon? Meg interrupted. Actually, I'm not too angry about this. After all, they were almost starving to death when they followed me. If they went to his place, at least they would have something to eat. Vicky smiled and said in a carefree manner, "Well, you can't let people starve to death for your dreams." Meg nodded. This was one of the reasons why he admired Vicky so much. Speaking of new plays, I've been planning to write a play about this war. Vicky's eyes seemed to sparkle when she talked about opera. This war? What could he write? Do you want peach trees or glutinous rice? AI Faye tilted her head. The scene of everyone chopping down the peach trees and piling them up on the street is indeed a bit shocking. But does that mean we won't have any peaches to eat next year? Mara also said, but it was a pity for the peaches. Meg and Irina smiled knowingly. 4 ordinary people. The thing that left the deepest impression on them was naturally the large-scale operation to seize the peach trees and glutinous rice. Although it had been 2 days since the end of the war, the soldiers on the front lines might not have returned home yet. The detailed news was only circulated among certain social classes. However, the legend of Alex saving the city again had already begun to circulate in the major tea houses and restaurants. The story was so well made up that even Meg couldn't help but want to say, "Good guy." As a literary creator, Vicky most likely heard some related news and then came up with the idea of writing a play. No. Seizing the peach trees and glutinous rice was only a part of the war. It was only a small part of the logistics. The real exciting part was the war that happened in the extreme north. You might not be able to imagine the scene of millions of skeletons rushing over. The giant dragons dropped large amounts of explosives, and hundreds of thousands of human archers shot millions of arrows consecutively. That scene, even the word magnificent is not enough to describe it. Of course, the most shocking scene was when Alex slashed the bone dragon with his sword and lured the devil into the formation with his own body. Then he cleverly used the teleportation formation that had been arranged in advance to escape, successfully sealing the devil and ending the war. Alex is simply too cool. You can't find another man like him in the world. Vicky was very excited as she spoke. Towards the end she even looked like a fangirl. How does this girl know so much about what happened at the front lines? Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Vicky in surprise. The details were exactly the same. Even among the soldiers on the front lines, only a few of them knew what he had done. This was also the reason why the rumors in the tea houses were so ridiculous. Are you attracted to him? Irina looked at Vicky with a faint smile. It's very difficult not to be. Vicky nodded. Meg carefully glanced at Irina and felt a sense of danger. Vicky quickly added, but of course it's impossible. Princess Irina is also super beautiful. She's on par with you, sister. I'm afraid only a beautiful and powerful woman like her would be a perfect match for Alex. Meg secretly heaved a sigh of relief for this girl. Is that so? Irina's face showed a hint of a smile. She pulled out her sword halfway and then put it back. Wasn't that right? In this world, the only person who could be compared to her in terms of beauty was herself. Leader, how do you know so much? You weren't around for the past 2 days. Don't tell me you went to the front lines? Mara asked curiously. Vicky's expression stiffened. She felt that she was a little reckless. She actually said so many things that she shouldn't have. It would be a little troublesome for her to cover it up now. Meg and Irina looked at each other. There was a hint of playfulness in their eyes. How is that possible? I can't even pick up a sword. How could I go to the front lines to be cannon fodder? Vicky smiled awkwardly and said, I went home to visit my family 2 days ago. I happened to meet an elder who came back from the front lines. I heard from him. She's lying. Meg and Irina could both tell. A person's micro-expressions could reveal a lot of things. Judging from the time, Vicky could indeed have appeared on the front lines of the ice field. It was just that they didn't know what kind of identity she had appeared in. However, if she was a young mistress from a rich family, why would she go to the front lines? This was not something to be taken lightly. Even a 10th-tier powerhouse could lose his life. So you intend to write a script related to Alex? Meg asked with a smile. He didn't expose Vicky's lie. I'm just thinking about it. After all, it's very difficult to find someone who can play him. Also, the setting is too big. You don't know how scary that demon is. I really can't reproduce it on stage. Vicky shook her head. Then if someone asks you to write a script, will you help? Irina asked. Not so far. After all, there are only 2 opera troupes in Rodu. Of course, if there's an interesting idea or story, I might give it a try, Vicky said with a smile. Irina nodded slightly. She had a rough idea of what to do. After dinner, Ev and Vicky took their leave. The Titan Tavern and the Black Cat Opera House were both open for business at night. Chapter 22:18. The Black Cat Song Troupe's first performance in their new costumes was a great success. Decent and appropriate costumes, beautiful singing and an exciting plot. Even in the shabby opera house, they still gave the audience a wonderful performance. After the performance, Vicky bowed and thanked the audience with the actors. All the audience stood up and applauded, and it took a long time before they stopped. In the corner of the last row of the venue, a few average-looking audience members watched the scene with tears in their eyes. The leader's dream has come true. That's great, a young man said with a smile. Yes, but it has nothing to do with us. If we had persevered a little longer, we would be standing on the stage with them now, a middle-aged man said with a sigh. Let's go, we should go back. The few of them lowered their heads and walked slowly toward the door with the crowd, looking somewhat lonely. They had gone through the most difficult times together, but they became deserters before the dawn came. However, to be able to see their former partners standing on the stage and performing the opera that they had worked so hard to rehearse together, they were still moved to tears. Since you're here, are you planning to leave without saying a word? The group walked to the door and was about to leave when a voice sounded in front of them. Everyone looked up and saw Vicky standing outside the door. "Leader," everyone called out subconsciously. Then everyone lowered their heads in shame, not daring to look at Vicky's eyes. "What do you think of today's stage?" Vicky asked with a smile. "It was the best stage I have ever seen." "Your performance was intoxicating," Fur looked up and said with a serious face. The others nodded as well. Today's opera performance had made them excited. Maybe it was because of the costumes. They felt that everyone had performed better than usual and contributed to a wonderful opera. "Sorry, leader, we didn't even say goodbye when we left." Abao lowered his head and said softly. The others also blamed themselves and did not dare to look at Vicky's eyes. They were all saved by Vicky from a desperate situation. They were all working towards the same dream, supporting and encouraging each other, but they had become deserters. "I have never blamed you for this. If you had said goodbye to me, I wouldn't have known how to persuade you to leave." Vicky looked at them with a smile. "If you go there, at least you'll have something to eat. If you stay, you'll only starve." Everyone became even more ashamed when they heard this. But things are different now. We have our own theater, new costumes, and an audience that can appreciate us. Plus, we have food to eat every day. We can eat meat every meal. Vicky stepped forward, looked at the crowd, and said seriously, "Come back, I need you. The Black Cat Song Troupe needs you." "Commander." Everyone looked up at Vicky in disbelief. They had expected to be scolded and mocked by Vicky. At the very least, she wouldn't want to see traitors like them. However, they didn't expect that their leader would actually ask them to come back. "Yeah, Lao Si Abao Shao Chi, come back. It's tiring for each of us to play so many roles. Plus, only you can perform your roles the best." Ibaka appeared beside Vicky. "Come back, we need you." The Black Cat Song Troupe members who had not changed out of their costumes came out from the side door and came to Vicky's side. They looked at Abao and the others and said, "Everyone." Abao and the others could not help but cry. The audience who were about to leave stopped when they saw this scene. Some people even tried to persuade them. "Commander, although we really want to come back, I'm afraid we can't." Abao wiped away his tears and shook his head. The eyes of Old Fourth and the others also showed a bit of sadness. "What?" Vicky looked at Abao and frowned. "Did Pascal force you to sign something?" Abao looked at Vicky, hesitated for a while and said guiltily, "When we joined Marca Troupe, Pascal made each of us sign a contract. We have to stay in Marca Troupe for 3 years. If we leave halfway, we have to pay a penalty of 50,000 copper coins. 50,000 copper coins. Everyone in the opera troupe gasped. For the opera troupe that had just started on the right path, this was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. Even if there were a lot of audience members tonight, the ticket revenue was only 3 to 4,000 copper coins. After deducting expenses, they would not be able to save much money in a month. Abao and the others had 8 people, so 50,000 copper coins per person would be 400,000 copper coins. Obviously, it was not something that the Black Cat Song Troupe could afford right now. "You can go back today. Tomorrow I will personally go to Marca Troupe and bring you back. You don't have to worry about the money." Vicky waved her hand and said resolutely, "But leader?" Abao was a little anxious. "Since you still call me leader, then do as I say. Don't be so wishy-washy." Vicky raised her eyebrows coldly, and her aura immediately rose. Abao only felt that his neck was cold. He shrunk his neck subconsciously and did not dare to say anything more. "That's enough. Don't block the door anymore." Vicky stood aside and made way. Everyone hurriedly moved aside so that the audience could continue to leave. Abao and the others went back first, and so did the audience. "Leader, is the money really okay?" Ibaka looked at Vicky and asked, holding the money bag in his hand. "I haven't spent the salary I got yesterday. You can use it to make up for it." "Me too. I had a bowl of noodles and the rest is still here. I bought a dress, but it only cost me 30 copper coins. The rest is here." Everyone took out their own money and handed it over. Vicky looked at the ragged money bags in everyone's hands and smiled. She reached out and pushed Ibaka's hand back. Then she looked at everyone and said, "Money is not a problem. I can solve it. This money is everyone's salary. Keep it well. I will go and bring them back tomorrow." Everyone looked at Vicky and hesitated for a moment, but they still put the money away. Leader would never lie to them. This was something that everyone knew. Since she said it was okay, then it must be okay. "I will go and buy some blankets for them tomorrow. Little Seven is afraid of the cold. I will go and buy some flowery clothes for Little Seven. The little girl loves to be beautiful. She has been crying in her dreams many times. Little Four's clothes are also ragged. I will go and buy a big jacket for him tomorrow. If everyone comes back, then we can perform in other operas. The audience will like it better if we perform in other operas." Everyone was talking at the same time, and they were already looking forward to a new life. Vicky smiled. Suddenly, she was very grateful for the choice that Mr. Hades gave her today, which gave her the confidence to bring her members back. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.